Before Qin Ping'an arrived at the Iron Lock Well with his 2 buckets, he passed a few stalls on Apricot Blossom Alley that were selling breakfast, causing his stomach to rumble without warning. However, he was truly short of money, so he could only force himself to keep going and line up before the well to draw water. There were 3 families before him, and when it was his turn, Zhuhou suddenly cut in front with a small bucket. This instantly caused the others behind him to grumble in anger. Even though they didn't curse or swear, the words that they uttered weren't pleasant to the ear either. This was especially the case with the hunched old woman. People referred to her as Granny Ma, and both of her sons were quite successful people, with each owning their own dragon kiln. Even though their dragon kilns were extremely small, ranking in the bottom few out of the 30 or so dragon kilns, they could still be regarded as some of the wealthiest people on Apricot Blossom Alley. For some reason, however, Granny Ma's relationship with her 2 daughters-in-law was extremely poor. Her sons and their wives had already moved to Peach Leaf Alley quite a while ago, so only the old woman still lived by herself in their ancestral home on Apricot Blossom Alley. In the eyes of Qin Ping'an, Lu Xianyang, and others of the same age, Granny Ma had always been a very frightening elder. She was extremely vicious when she scolded others, and she was also an especially stingy and petty person. She would always try to take everything for herself. In fact, if the children dared to use the snow in front of her house for a snowball fight, or if they dared to take the icicles hanging from her roof, she would pick up a broom and chase them through several alleys, cursing and swinging and not becoming tired in the least. In the past, there was most likely only a single person in this alley to the west of the small town who could suppress Granny Ma's ferocity, Gukan's mother. Now, however, it was rumored that the widow had left with a distant relative of her dead husband and would settle in her husband's hometown. Granny Ma had already become slightly kinder in recent years, yet following the departure of Gukan's mother, she immediately became lively and ferocious again, returning to her old self. It was as if everyone was an eyesore to her. Indeed, upon seeing Zhuhou cutting the line, Granny Ma immediately started to speak strangely. Her voice wasn't loud, and a fake smile was stretched across her face. She purposefully chit-chat with the woman next to her, saying that there were some girls who could finally lift their veil and make their relationship public. In any case, she had never been able to keep her legs together when walking anyway. This was a cause for celebration, as this girl finally didn't need to suffer the fate of a lowly maidservant. She could now be referred to as a missus. Qin Ping'an's head became slightly numb as he heard this. However, he couldn't bring himself to shoo Zhuhou away either. Even though she was in the wrong, they had already been neighbors for so many years, after all. After drawing 2 buckets of water for Lu Xianyang, he hurriedly drew another bucket of water for Zhuhou. He wanted to leave this gossiping group of women as soon as possible. However, Granny Ma became even more infuriated upon seeing the despicable maidservant ignoring her. This was the case when elites exchanged blows with each other. The most frightening thing was if one's opponent didn't acknowledge their strike at all. If that were the case, what use would their powerful skills be? When the old woman argued with the seductive widow in the past, she would indeed lose every single time. However, the old woman would also feel like her skills would improve a little every single time. Thus, she was confident that she would definitely win their next argument. Right now, however, things were completely different. The lowly maidservant from Clay Vase Alley was keeping her mouth shut and pretending not to hear her. Yet, the expression in her eyes carried a hint of something that made the old woman feel extremely uncomfortable. This caused the old woman to become even angrier. She truly wanted to rush over to scratch and ruin that lowly maidservant's face. That way, the youths and men in the nearby alleys wouldn't have their souls sucked away by that shameless maidservant's looks and figure. This was especially the case with her grandson. Even though others viewed him as a retard, even his grandmother had recently felt like he had truly lost his mind. He was always speaking gibberish, and for the past while, he was always saying that he would take this maidservant from Clay Vase Alley back home and have her become his wife. He would then smash a hole in the heavens. Unable to elicit any reaction from the utterly detestable maidservant, Granny Ma could only turn her attention to the poor young boy beside her. She clicked her tongue in wonder and said, "Despicable good-for-nothing piece of mud. You caused your parents to die, yet you still have the face to keep living? With your lowly abilities, you know that you'll never be able to get a wife, so you're shamelessly trying to get together with someone else's maidservant? What a perfect match. A despicable boy and a detestable girl. Indeed, the two of you might as well get together. In any case, Clayvase Alley is a place for trash like you two. When you have children in the future, perhaps they might even become the rulers of Clayvase Alley." Qin Ping'an contemplated for a moment before bending over and preparing to put down the 2 buckets of water. However, Jigui had already put down her bucket of water a while ago and started to stride toward the unrestrained old woman. Without saying a single word, she raised her hand and slapped the old woman, causing her to pirouette on the spot. The old woman was dazed and dizzy, and she only remained upright thanks to the support of the women beside her. Without waiting for the old woman to recover, Jigui immediately stepped forward and slapped her again, cursing, "Undying old hag, I've already put up with your crap for far too long." The old woman shook her head, with smoke billowing out of her nose in rage. She was just about to strike back, yet whether it was a misperception or not, it was as if the women beside her were holding her up far too well, so much so that she couldn't break free from their grasp. As a result, she was humiliated for the 3rd time. This time, the maidservant used her knuckles to forcefully rap the old woman on the forehead, saying, "If you dare to cuss others in the future, I'll make sure to drag your tongue out. Every time you curse, I'll use a needle to stab your tongue." The old woman was quite shaken by this, and she even forgot to curse back as a result, let alone attempt to strike back. The young girl turned around and left in haste. Upon seeing that her neighbor had already picked up the bucket of water for her, she smiled in acknowledgement and returned to Clayvase Alley with him. Before Qin Ping'an could even speak, the young girl had already opened her mouth and said, "No need to thank me. I wasn't standing up for you or anything." Qin Ping'an was rendered speechless. The empty-handed young girl continued to mumble to herself. From the beginning to the end, however, she never showed any intention of wanting to carry her own bucket of water. Meanwhile, the old woman was howling beside the iron lock well. "Cursed little wretch! You deserve the wrath of the heavens. Why is my life so hard and miserable? Oh, the heavens don't have eyes. Why don't you unleash a thunderbolt to smash that detestable and seductive little maidservant?" The young girl was walking briskly, yet she suddenly performed a strange movement at this moment, using her palms to push up at the sky. Fortunately, Qin Ping'an had been neighbors with her for many years, so he didn't find this to be strange. When they passed by the breakfast stalls, Qin Ping'an caught a glimpse of a familiar figure. She wasn't tall, and dressed in her green garment. She was currently buying a freshly steamed meat bun. It was still piping hot, and its fragrance was wafting through the entire street. Qin Ping'an looked up. It was still morning, yet the sky had already become extremely overcast at some unknown time. Like the large blanket of a wealthy person, there was a thick layer of dark clouds laying there and basking in the sun. Boom! Thunder rumbled above the small town. Near the iron lock well, Granny Ma quickly stood up before hurriedly running home. Her small bucket swayed back and forth, spilling water everywhere. When she arrived home, perhaps there wouldn't even be half a bucket of water left. This was probably because the old woman still had some self-awareness. If the heavens truly had eyes, the first thunderbolt that crashed down would most likely land on her head. Qin Ping'an also looked up upon hearing the rumbling thunder. He was slightly confused. It didn't look like it was going to rain. Jigui smiled with squinted eyes and said, "Young master told me that he's read about this before. It's said that early in spring, a god in the heavenly court will put on golden armor and beat a drum in the clouds, farewelling the old and welcoming the new. At the same time, the beating drums will also scare off all evil to make way for the arriving spring." Qin Ping'an nodded and said, "Your young master is indeed very well read." The young girl sighed and said, "Young master is good in many aspects, but he's just a little too lazy. He also likes to curse the heavens all the time, and I don't think this is good." Qin Ping'an didn't have a habit of talking about others behind their backs, so he didn't reply to Jigui's comments. However, Song Jisun had indeed maintained a strange habit for many years. That was, he always liked to curse the heavens, just like Granny Ma did. He would accuse the heavens of being blind and so on and so forth. Even so, intellectuals had their own rules, so Song Jisun wouldn't curse the heavens if it were snowing, thundering, or if there were iridescent clouds in the sky. According to him, he would only curse the heavens when it was dozing. That way, the heavens couldn't hear him, so it naturally wouldn't become angry. Meanwhile, he would also be able to blow off some steam. This was a win-win situation. Seeing no response from Qin Ping'an, Jigui asked in a seemingly casual manner, "You didn't return home last night? Did you stay over at Lu Xianyang's?" Qin Ping'an nodded and replied, "I have a guest at home, so it's not suitable for me to stay overnight." "Oh, that's right. Did Mr. Qi visit you a while ago? What did he say to you?" she suddenly asked. "Why do you ask?" Qin Ping'an retorted. Jigui wore an innocent smile as she replied, "No reason. I'm just asking because I coincidentally saw Mr. Qi when I was going over to draw water this morning. He said that he was going for a morning stroll, and he even asked me if you were home." I naturally gave him an honest answer. Qin Ping'an smiled and replied, "I also came across Mr. Qi by coincidence that time, and he merely made some small talk with me. He said that I should have gone to school with Lu Xianyang when I was younger. I could only tell him that my family was too poor, so that would have been impossible. Otherwise, I would have also liked to go to school. Is that all?" Jigui asked in puzzlement. Qin Ping'an looked her in the eyes and said with a smile, "What else would it be?" She dismissed it with a smile. The two of them parted ways at a crossroad. Jigui accepted her bucket of water and continued to Clay Vase Alley, while Qin Ping'an went the other way and returned to Lu Xianyang's house. Afterward, he would still need to head to the eastern gate of the small town to collect the letters to deliver. He would earn 1 coin for each letter delivered. Had Qin Ping'an started this job earlier, with his ability to traverse through the mountains on just his 2 legs, he would have most likely already made enough money to get himself a wife. Upon arriving at the entrance of Clay Vase Alley, Jigui saw her young master standing there and yawning. She quickly walked over and asked in curiosity, "Young master, why have you come out?" Song Jisun stretched his body and said in a lazy voice, "I was feeling bored." "Young master, when is the new kiln supervision official going to return to town? Will we be able to leave for the capital then?" Jigui asked quietly. Song Jisun pondered for a moment before replying, "He'll be back within 10 days. Jigui appeared hesitant, with the small bucket in her hand swaying back and forth. Song Jisun smiled and asked, "What's wrong? There's something on your mind?" "Young master, can I borrow that local county chronicle to have a peek?" she asked timidly. "Just for 1 or 2 days so I can learn some words. Otherwise, others might belittle me when I arrive at the capital. At that time, even young master will be laughed at because of me." Song Jisun couldn't help but chuckle. After contemplating for a brief moment, he said, "What's so embarrassing about this request? However, remember to wash your hands before reading the book and make sure not to get the pages dirty. Also, be careful that wax doesn't drip onto it. Apart from these, there's nothing else to worry about. After all, this is merely a crappy book that chronicles events up until now." A bright smile spread across Jigui's face. "Thank you, young master." Song Jisun also laughed heartily, saying, "Come over here, let me carry the bucket of water for you." However, Jigui stepped aside and said seriously, "Young master, isn't it said that a noble gentleman should distance himself from kitchen work? How can young master concern himself with such chores? If others hear of this, I'll definitely be punished by them." Song Jisun chuckled in anger, saying, "Rules, principles, and etiquette. These things can frighten and trick others, but I'm..." However, the young intellectual suddenly stopped speaking. Jigui was extremely curious, and she asked, "Young master is what?" A frivolous smile returned to Song Jisun's face, and he pointed at himself before saying, "I'm actually nothing but a farmer. I tend to the farm and draw out plots. Then I have people sow the seeds and water the land. Meanwhile, I'll wait for the crops to grow and give me a bountiful harvest. Year after year, this is exactly how I live. Jigui was mystified. Song Jisun roared with laughter. However, he suddenly became serious and asked, Jigui, did Qin Pingyan carry the bucket of water for you the entire time? The maidservant nodded with an innocent expression. Song Jisun's voice was meaningful as he said, a sage once said that some people treat a stranger's small act of kindness as something to be treasured, yet they treat their friends' and family sacrifices as something that can be taken for granted, not showing them any gratitude at all. This kind of attitude isn't right. The maidservant became even more mystified. Huh? The young boy stroked his chin and mused to himself, you actually didn't understand my insinuation? How should I respond? Perhaps I should swap you for a smarter and more understanding beautiful young maidservant. The maidservant couldn't hide her smile anymore. She completely ignored his threat, and she exposed him by saying, Young master is actually trying to ask me who this knowledgeable sage is, right? Young master, I know. Of course it's you. Song Jisun laughed heartily. Jigui indeed knows me well. A middle-aged scholar was sitting upright in the library of the private school. As the spring thunder rumbled, the black and white go pieces before him all disintegrated into dust. There was a common method that the youths and children in the small town used to catch rock slate fish. They would use hammers to forcefully strike the rocks in the creek, causing the hiding rock slate fish to fall unconscious and float to the surface. This practice was identical to a saying found in books, beating around the mountain to scare the tiger. However, if one wanted to warn a sage not to defy the heavens and go against the great Tao, the corresponding weapon one needed to wield would most likely have to be the vast and mighty thunder in the sky. Qin Pingyan returned to Lu Xianyang's house and poured the 2 buckets of water into the vat in the courtyard kitchen. He then ran to the door and shouted, Lu Xianyang, I'm going to use your firewood and seasoning to make some fish soup for Ningyao. Is that okay? Lu Xianyang, who had gone back to sleep, was suddenly jolted awake by Qin Pingyan's question. Just how bloody annoying are you? I was just dreaming of Jigui smiling at me. Hurry up and compensate me with Jigui, he roared in anger. Qin Pingyan shook his head in reply. However, he also remembered Lu Xianyang's request at this moment, and he said apologetically, I really did come across Jigui at the Iron Lock well earlier. However, we were disturbed by Granny Ma, so I forgot to greet her for you. When I deliver the fish soup to Ningyao in a moment, I promise that I'll head over to pass on your greeting. Lu Xianyang hurriedly jumped up and got changed. He then ran to the doorstep and looked at the skinny figure who was busily at work, chuckling and saying, I'll go and deliver the fish soup with you in a moment. Oh, that's right. Is Jigui wearing that red dress today? Or is she wearing the green one? When I earn 200 copper coins, I'll be able to afford that exquisite makeup powder. I know that she's had her eyes on it for a very long time, but she's always been reluctant to buy it. It's all Song Jisun's fault, that poor little bastard. He's way too stingy. He's dressed like a fancy bastard from Fortune Street, yet he can't even spare a few coins to buy some more dresses for poor Jigui. If I were her young master, I'd definitely buy her whatever she wanted. She'd live in even more comfort and extravagance than the young ladies from Fortune Street. Qin Pingyan ignored Lu Xianyang's foolish daydreaming. He genuinely couldn't understand why Lu Xianyang had fallen head over heels for Jigui and not someone else. Of course, this wasn't because he looked down on her standing as Song Jisun's maidservant. Nor was it because he thought she was ugly. Rather, it was because he couldn't see any predestined fate between Lu Xianyang and Jigui. Why do you also call her Jigui now? Why don't you call her Wangju anymore? Qin Pingyan asked in curiosity. Lu Xianyang grinned and said, after realizing that you also couldn't write the words Jigui, I decided that I couldn't care less anymore. Qin Pingyan was slightly exasperated as he replied, why are you comparing yourself to me? Why aren't you comparing yourself to Song Jisun? After all, Jigui is his maidservant, not mine. Lu Xianyang sneered and said, it's not like he's better than you at everything. For example, has he ever been able to call someone mother or father? Isn't he inferior to you in this sense? It's no wonder that Gukan's mother, Granny Ma, and the other women are so toxic when speaking about him. Song Jisin can't be regarded as a pure and innocent person anyway, or else why doesn't he confidently sit in the office of the kiln supervision official? Why does he have to suffer in Clay Vase Alley instead? Yet, he still dares to look down on others. So, he deserves to be slandered and called a bastard. Qin Pingan stood up and walked to the door of the kitchen, saying, "Lu Xianying, even though Song Jisin and I can't be regarded as friends, the way you speak about him." Lu Xianying hurriedly raised his hands, refusing to listen to Qin Pingan's lecture. He wore a sly smile as he said, "I'll stop slandering him, okay? Qin Pingan, who did you learn this stubbornness and inflexibility from? After all, my grandpa said that your father and mother were both very amiable people, especially your mother. Her voice was always soft and gentle, and she also liked to smile all the time. Her temper was truly as good as could be. My grandpa also said that Granny Ma would curse almost everyone when she was young, yet she would always make an exception when it came to your mother. Not only did Granny Ma not curse her, but she would even smile at her." Qin Pingan couldn't wipe the smile from his face. Lu Xianying waved his hand to shoo him away. "Hurry up and bring the soup to your wife." Qin Pingan rolled his eyes, saying, "If you're so capable, why don't you say that to her face?" Lu Xianying chuckled and replied, "You might be stupid, but I'm certainly not." A short moment later, Qin Pingan walked out with a small pot of soup. After locking the door, the two of them headed over to Clay Vase Alley. After arriving at Qin Pingan's house, Lu Xianying saw him stupidly standing there and knocking on the gate. Only at this moment did he realize that Qin Pingan had actually left his keys with Ningyao. Lu Xianying felt like this person couldn't be saved. The young woman in black didn't wear her veiled hat while at home, so her pretty face was uncovered for them to see when she opened the gates. For some unknown reason, Lu Xianying was slightly scared of this serious young woman. It wasn't because of her aloofness, since Ji Gui was as aloof if not more so than her. Yet, Lu Xianying still had the courage to pester her all the time. It wasn't because of her weapons or strength either, because Lu Xianying had never been afraid of the rich descendants from Fortune Street who had surrounded and beaten him up many times. Even though he had fled in shambles, he had never felt a sense of fear toward them. Yet, for some reason, he was slightly scared of Ningyao, this girl from outside. Ningyao sat down and removed the lid of the clay pot. Her slender eyes squinted when she smelled the fragrance of the fish soup, and she nodded and said in a gentle voice, "Thanks." Qin Pingan was an extremely observant person, and he knew that this was most likely a sign that the aloof young woman was happy. He cooked a pot of porridge for her, telling her to keep an eye on the flames herself. He then turned to Lu Xianying and said, "You can wait for Ji Gui yourself. I need to deliver some letters first." Lu Xianying was sitting on the doorstep with his ears pricked for any movement next door. He would immediately act if he heard any squeaking or rustling. He was in a terrible mood, and he snapped in impatience, "Yeah, go do what you need to." Qin Pingan left his house. Just as he was about to exit Clay Vase Alley, he suddenly noticed the path before him becoming a little darker. Looking up, he realized that this was because there was a tall and broad man in white robes standing there, with one hand behind his back and one hand resting on the white jade belt around his waist. His eyes were gazing into the distance. Likely realizing that he was blocking the narrow alleyway, the man smiled faintly and turned to his side to let Qin Pingan through. Qin Pingan was extremely puzzled as he quickened his pace and left Clay Vase Alley. Glancing back, he saw that the man had already slowly entered Clay Vase Alley. Even though he had only taken a fleeting glance at the man just then, Qin Pingan had still seen the faint golden embroidery on the front and back of the man's spotless white robe. These golden threads vaguely formed two pictures, wherein there was seemingly a creature soaring through the mountains and clouds. It was especially mysterious. Qin Pingan pushed these thoughts out of his mind, and he merely treated the man as another outsider like Fu Nanhua and the others. He was going to Clay Vase Alley to look for a fated opportunity. After visiting the old locust tree with Mr. Qi the other day, he was already feeling much more relaxed than before. He felt like as long as Mr. Qi stayed in this small town, he could still at least ask for justice if something untoward were to happen. When he jogged past Apricot Blossom Alley, Qin Ping'an saw that the young girl in green who he had encountered last night was still sitting at the stall that was selling wontons. There were chopsticks in her hand, and she was lightly drumming them against the table. There was a spirited expression on her slightly chubby and innocent face, and her eyes were intently fixed on the smoking pot where the wontons were cooking. Even though Qin Ping'an was only 5 or 6 steps away from her, she didn't notice him at all. To this young girl in green, food was of paramount importance. Even if the sky collapsed, she would still need to finish her meal before fleeing. Qin Ping'an admired this unfamiliar young girl from the bottom of his heart. He didn't disturb her, and he smiled as he continued to run to the east of the small town. There were some people and some things, even if they were only scenery on the roadside, that would fill one with a sense of joy with only a single glance. When Qin Ping'an arrived at the wooden gates in the east of the small town, he found that the disheveled gatekeeper was standing on his tippy toes on a tree stump and gazing toward the east. It was as if he were waiting for some important person to arrive. While hanging out around the old locust tree, Qin Ping'an had heard the elderly residents chat about the arrival of the new kiln supervision official. When he had first arrived in the small town, he was offered a grand welcome, with almost all of the elders from the 4 surnames and 10 clans coming to the eastern gate to greet him. However, after waiting under the scorching sun for several hours, the only person who had arrived was a subordinate from the kiln supervision office who told them that the kiln supervision official was already in his office, and that he had only just woken up from his afternoon nap. He then told them to directly go to the office of the kiln supervision official. The group of wealthy people was infuriated, but according to rumors, none of them had dared to complain a peep when they eventually entered the kiln supervision office. In fact, they had all smiled as obsequiously as they could. Qin Ping'an had found their recounts extremely strange. Why were the elderly residents speaking as if they were personally there to witness it? Each time they discussed rumors from Fortune Street and Peach Leaf Alley, they also spoke as if they were personally present to witness the events. For example, how the auntie from the Liu clan was in an illicit relationship with that instructor, and how she had frantically straightened her clothes and covered her large breasts when they had been caught by someone else. They revealed a whole heap of details, not missing anything at all. It was as if they were the instructor himself. Lu Xianyang would always gulp when he heard gossip like this. Song Jisun would also occasionally hang out near the old locust tree, although he would never bring Ji Gui along with him. His smile would also be more reserved than Lu Xianyang's. However, when he secretly hooted and heckled with the others, his voice would be even louder than when he recited the teachings of the sages during morning and night. Qin Ping'an squatted next to the tree stump and patiently waited for the gatekeeper to acknowledge him. The disheveled man cursed before hopping off the tree stump and shooting a glance at the young boy. He didn't say anything, and he went to the mud hut to retrieve a bundle of letters. There were 6 letters in total, yet he only handed Qin Ping'an 5 copper coins. Qin Ping'an roughly flicked through the letters, and he didn't make any complaints. This was because 2 of the letters were addressed to neighbors on Fortune Street. Thus, Qin Ping'an wasn't willing to take such a petty advantage. Of course, if the gatekeeper suddenly became extremely benevolent and chose to give him 6 copper coins instead, he wouldn't refuse this either. Qin Ping'an planned out a route before casually asking, "Waiting for someone?" The gatekeeper glanced at the wide road in the east and huffed, "Waiting for your grandpa." Qin Ping'an hurriedly scooted away, not wanting to become an outlet for his frustration. The gatekeeper chuckled and mused, "Oh, he's quite an observant one." He looked up at the sky. The rumbling thunder had already subsided, and the blanket of dark clouds that had seemingly wanted to bear down on the houses had also slowly dissipated. He sat down on the tree stump and heaved a sigh, saying, "When immortals fight, it's the commoners and mortals who suffer the most." Of the 6 letters, 4 of them were addressed to the Liu clan, Li clan, Zhao clan, and Song clan of Fortune Street. These were the 4 major clans of the small town. The remaining 2 letters were addressed to people in Peach Leaf Alley. Coincidentally, one of them was addressed to the benevolent old man from before. Even more coincidentally, it was again this old man who opened the door to collect the letter. He recognized the young boy in straw sandals, and he said jokingly, "Young child, you're really not going to come in for a drink?" Ping'an wore a bashful smile as he shook his head. The old man wasn't surprised by this, and he simply retrieved some copper coins from his sleeve and handed them to Ping'an, saying, "There's a happy occasion in our family today, so this is just a little something that all visitors can receive. It's just a token of good fortune. It's nothing much, only 10 copper coins, so be at ease and accept it." Only after hearing this did Ping'an accept the copper coins. He smiled and said, "Thank you, Grandpa Wei." The old man nodded in acknowledgement, and he suddenly said, "Young child, whenever you've got nothing to do in the next while, you can head over to the old locust tree and sit in its shade. If you see any branches or leaves on the floor, you can take them home and place them somewhere. They can keep away insects and vermin. Isn't that nice? And they're free as well." Ping'an bowed to the old man in gratitude. The old man wore a pleased smile, and he said, "Off you go. Spring is the most important time of the year, so it'll definitely be good for you to exercise more during this time." The young boy left the bluestone slabs of Peach Leaf Alley behind him. The old man stood at his door for a long time, gazing at the 2 rows of peach trees lining the alley. A shapely young maidservant walked up to the old man, saying in a soft voice, "Grandpa, what are you looking at? The weather's cold outside, so be careful not to catch the chills." The maidservant had already served this old man for quite some years, so she knew that he was a kind and benevolent person. The young girl respected but didn't need to fear the old man, so she asked with a cheeky smile, "Grandpa, you're not reminiscing about how you met a girl in your youth, are you?" Was the girl also standing under the peach trees at that time? The old man smiled and replied, "Taoya, both you and that young boy are kind-hearted and determined people." The maidservant wore a lovely and innocent smile upon hearing this praise. The old man suddenly smiled and said, "A distant relative is going to visit in the next few days. When they leave, you can also leave with the other children in the family." The maidservant faltered upon hearing this. Her eyes became teary, and she sniffed, "Grandpa, I don't want to leave here." The benevolent old man waved his hand and said, "I'm going to look at the scenery in the alley for a while longer. You can go back in first. Taoya, listen to me. Otherwise, I'm going to get angry." The maidservant had no option but to head back in. However, she couldn't help but glance back several times. The peach leaves in the alley were lush and verdant. However, peach blossoms were still yet to form. The old man gently exhaled. He then walked out the door and down the steps, walking to a nearby peach tree and standing under it. There was sadness in his voice as he said, "A beautiful girl like the blooming peach blossoms. There's truly no opportunity for me to witness it again." He glanced back at his house and murmured, "The uniqueness of this small town is innately discordant with the great Tao." The sages forcefully transformed this area at that time, allowing this small town to enjoy great fortune for 3,000 years. Many people have walked out of here and left their descendants all throughout the eastern treasured Vile continent. However, just how astute are the heavens? Thus, it's now time for the scores to be settled and for us to pay what we owe. If you children don't leave as soon as possible, are you going to stay and await death alongside us? Us who are old and broken like shattered porcelain? You have to realize that death can come great or minor. For the thousands of people in this small town, what we're going to face is a great death, a death where there is no next life. So, while the heavens are still turning a blind eye, it's best that as many of you leave as possible." The old man extended a shriveled hand and placed it on a branch, saying, "Kind and determined children, here's wishing that the heavens don't target and suppress you." At some unknown time, Zhao Yao's grandma, the old woman with a cane, had already walked over, saying, "You're already about to be 6 feet under, yet you're still being so hopeful and naive. Just like old women caking their faces in makeup, your actions are truly vile and repulsive. Is this calamity something that your kindness and benevolence can stop?" The old man was slightly entranced as he looked at the equally old woman, and he mysteriously said, "You've come." The old woman faltered upon hearing this. However, she immediately became enraged, swinging her cane at him and saying, "Shameless old geezer. How old are you? Yet, you still dare to make such remarks. Like raindrops, the cane swung down at the old man again and again. He could only flee in a hurry. However, he couldn't help but laugh heartily as he did so. Standing under the peach tree, the old woman was still as angry as could be. She regretted becoming soft-hearted and coincidentally walking to Peach Leaf Alley. In the end, she looked up at the budding leaves of the peach tree. She then walked back to Fortune Street with her cane clicking against the bluestone slabs. This was a peaceful town that had prospered for thousands of years. In the end, however, it would unexpectedly become a town whose pitiful residents would enjoy no reincarnation. Was there truly not even a sliver of hope? The creek gradually became shallower, and the well gradually became colder. The old locust tree grew even older, and the iron lock grew even rustier. The large clouds bore down on the small town. This year, the peach tree produced leaves, but it produced no blossoms. Qin Ping'an saw the young girl in green again. This time, she was quietly walking behind a middle-aged man. As she walked, she didn't forget to lower her head to nibble on a scallion pancake. The man wore an exasperated expression. He stopped upon seeing Qin Ping'an and asked, "Were you the person who I shooed away that time?" Something slammed into the man's back. The young girl in green looked up in a daze after running into the wall, and upon suddenly seeing Qin Ping'an, she was just about to greet him with a smile. However, she immediately turned her back to him instead, hurriedly using her hands to wipe her mouth. Qin Ping'an suppressed his smile as he nodded at the man and said, "Hi, Master Wan." By the looks of it, this young girl was most likely Master Ruan's daughter. However, the father and daughter looked completely different. In fact, it was fortunate that this was the case. The man whom Qin Ping'an had referred to as Master Wan was none other than the blacksmith who had moved to the south near the creek soon after arriving in the small town. The middle-aged man asked, "Why hasn't Lu Xianyang come to forge iron for the past 2 days?" Qin Ping'an was just about to help Lu Xianyang explain the situation, but the man had already started to say coldly, "Go and tell that brat. If I don't see him today, then he won't need to come to my forge again." Qin Ping'an hurriedly said, "Master Wan, something urgent came up for him." The man cut the young boy off, saying bluntly, "That's his problem. What's it got to do with me?" Qin Ping'an wasn't someone who was good with words, so he was immediately stumped, with his face flushing red with worry. However, he didn't know what to say, and he was afraid that he would make this situation even worse. After all, he had personally experienced Master Ruan's blunt nature before. The young girl in green wanted to say something to help Qin Ping'an, yet she was preemptively scolded by her father, who said, "You eat your pancake." The upset young girl suddenly quickened her pace and forcefully stepped on her father's heel. As if a gust of wind had appeared underfoot, she then quickly fled into the distance, instantly vanishing without a trace. The man sighed in sorrow. He ignored Qin Ping'an and continued to walk forward. Qin Ping'an also heaved a sigh. He then ran to a breakfast stall and purchased 6 buns before hurrying back to Clay Vase Alley. When he arrived home, what he saw was Lu Xianyang squatting on top of the wall, with the top half of his body leaning into Song Jisun's courtyard. He was eavesdropping with full concentration. There were occasionally times when Qin Ping'an felt like Lu Xianyang truly deserved a beating. For example, now, he had no option but to say, "I came across Master Wan just now, and he told you to head over to the blacksmith forge today. He also said that if you don't go today, he'll dismiss you from your position." Lu Xianyang was absent-minded as he replied, "What's the hurry? Where else is he going to find a disciple as skilled and hardworking as me? Master Wan is merely making some empty threats. It'll be fine even if I go tomorrow." Qin Ping'an shook his head and responded, "I'm absolutely certain that Master Wan wasn't joking." Lu Xianyang was extremely annoyed, and he muttered, "All right, I'll head over in a little while. I'm doing something important now, so don't disturb me." Qin Ping'an handed 2 of the buns to Ning Yao for breakfast. Lu Xianyang directly took 3 of them, leaving only 1 for Qin Ping'an to eat. Lu Xianyang scoffed down the buns in no time at all. As he wiped his mouth, he quietly said, "Song Jisun had a visitor, and it was clear that he was an extraordinarily important person." If I'm not wrong, he's most likely the newly appointed kiln supervision official. That time he visited our dragon kiln in his official garb, old man Yao didn't allow you good-for-nothing trainees to come out and pollute his eyes. He didn't give you guys the chance to broaden your horizons. However, I was an exception, and old man Yao even told me to demonstrate the jumping Buren technique to him. Qin Ping'an smiled and murmured, "Everyone knows that the new kiln supervision official is quite caring for Song Jisun. What are you acting all suspicious for?" Lu Xianyang was riddled with anxiety as he exclaimed, "There's no way that a pretty boy like him can defeat me. However, what if Ji Gui falls for this impressive official? I won't stand much of a chance against him. At that time, your future sister-in-law will run away with someone else. What will I do? And what will you do?" Qin Ping'an directly left the room. He left Lu Xianyang to squat there and mope by himself. Meanwhile, Ning Yao was sitting upright with one hand gripping the hilt of her saber. It was as if she were facing a powerful enemy. There were beads of sweat on her forehead. This was the first time that Qin Ping'an had seen her wear such an expression. However, even though her body was tense and alert, her eyes were gleaming with excitement and anticipation. When Qin Ping'an returned to the doorway, she asked, "Do you know who that guest was?" "I heard Lu Xianyang say that he's our new kiln supervision official. He seems like a fairly polite person, and he even shuffled over for me to pass in the alley just then," Qin Ping'an replied. Ning Yao smiled coldly and commented, "This type of person is the most terrifying." Qin Ping'an was puzzled by this remark. If someone sees an ant on the side of the street, will they trample on it for no reason? She asked. Qin Ping'an pondered for a moment before replying, "Guken definitely will. He often pours water down ant nests, and he sometimes uses rocks to block the entrances to their nests as well. When Lu Xianyang is in a bad mood, he probably would as well." The young woman in black was rendered speechless. Qin Ping'an cracked a grin and said, "However, I know what you're trying to say." Ning Yao wore an astonished expression. "Really?" Qin Ping'an nodded in confirmation. "I feel like there are two layers of meanings to your words. The first layer is describing how the residents of the small town are like nothing more than ants in the eyes of outsiders like you. The second layer is describing how there is also a gulf in level among the outsiders. Fu Nanhua and Kai Jinjian can be regarded as children like Gu Kan, and it's because of this that they feel like they can control the lives of mere ants and more so take an interest in doing so. Or perhaps they find these ants an eyesore. However, the new kiln supervision official is different. Everything he says and does conform to his status. Thus, he appears extremely polite." "Ning Yao, is that right? How did you reach this conclusion?" the young woman asked. "After taking a trip to Death's Door and back, it seems like my brain is also slightly more clever than before," the young boy joked. "What did you see when you were about to die?" Ning Yao asked in a solemn voice. "I didn't see anything," Qin Ping'an replied. He was slightly puzzled, but he still answered truthfully, continuing, "In fact, I didn't think of anything else when I was in that alley." "Perhaps it'll be better for you to ask Funan Hua and Kai Jinjian this question. Maybe they were able to see something." Ning Yao humped coldly. "Oh, what a brilliant idea." Then, she stared intently at the young boy in straw sandals for some reason. Qin Ping'an was slightly flustered, and he asked, "What's wrong?" Ning Yao frowned in slight annoyance and muttered to herself in her local tongue, saying, "Regardless of whether it's the sword techniques, mind cultivation, or physique and soul tempering of the sword arts of my family, these are all secrets that can't be revealed to outsiders. Moreover, I haven't mastered them either, so how could I dare to teach others? I haven't learned the cultivation or martial techniques of other places either, or else I could at least point him in the right direction. It'll be fine even if it's something that can improve his physique or increase his lifespan. However, where in the world can I find such an elementary secret technique right now?" Her eyes suddenly lit up and she said, "Steal one? No, not steal. It's just borrowing. I'm going to borrow it and return it after all." However, it was a shame that her expression quickly became one of dejection. She gritted her teeth and spat, "That despicable old eunuch. Just you wait. See how I smash up your imperial palace in the future." Her face was sullen as she continued, "Perhaps my only option is to ask the blacksmith Master Wan?" I'm fairly good at hacking at others, and I've already mastered around half of my mother's skills. If I have to ask someone for a favor, however, I'm truly not good at this. Qin Ping'an sat on the doorstep and watched Ningyao mumbling to herself, her expression changing as frequently as the iridescent colors of the clouds. The handsome man in the white robe and jade belt was standing inside Song Jisun's room. As he looked around, he furrowed his brows slightly. That person only organized such a shabby place for you? Song Jisun pursed his lips and didn't reply. His maidservant Ji Gui had already perceptibly returned to her own room. According to the most popular explanation in the small town, the previous kiln supervision official Master Song hadn't been good at running the dragon kills. Thus, he hadn't been able to produce any imperial wares that the imperial court was satisfied with. After putting in some hard work and constructing that covered bridge, he had returned to the capital to report for duty. Of course, he had also left Song Jisun, his illegitimate son. However, he had only bought him a single maidservant to take care of the chores. Apart from that, he had also entrusted this son to a friend, the person who was going to replace him as the new kiln supervision official. It was rumored that his surname was also Song. However, regarding the truth of the matter, those who were close to the situation might be mystified, but those who were observing from a distance wouldn't necessarily be able to see things clearly either. Even Song Jisun was unsure of this person's relationship with the previous official. Were they close associates in the officialdom? Were they intimate friends who had met during their studies? Or were they adversaries from different factions in the capital? When that man had left, he had briefly mentioned that a new kiln supervision official would soon arrive in the small town. Not long after his arrival, he would then bring him and his maidservant out of the small town and to the capital. The previous official had also told Song Jisun that he needed to be extremely respectful toward the new kiln supervision official. He couldn't be impolite in the slightest. However, Song Jisun didn't have a good impression of this arrogant and overbearing man. This was most likely because he detested those with the position of kiln supervision official. It was merely in order to maintain his dignity that he had appeared so confident before Ji Gui and appeared so calm and unhurried when facing their imminent departure from their hometown. The man smiled and said, "So be it. That pedantic old scholar before me has always been such a careful and cautious person. He doesn't seem like a man at all, and he instead seems like a woman. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been sent here to look after you." Song Jisun appeared far from amused. The man curled his lips in contempt as he glanced at the large chest where the young boy kept his trinkets. "Before coming here, I had already visited Old Dragon City's Fenghuo. What a persod. Even in such a place, his Dao heart was still almost shattered. Anyhow, you can continue your business with him. As for whether you make a loss or make a gain, that's your own responsibility. I won't involve myself in such trifling and worthless matters. However, before we leave, you have to come with me to the covered bridge and kowtow a few times. After that, there's nothing else for you to do. Come home with me and do what you have to do, sit where you have to sit, and perform what your duty requires you to perform. It's that simple. Do you understand?" "Of course I understand. Your words aren't obscure at all, Master Song." However, he sneered and continued, "But why should I listen to you?" The man chuckled, turning to face the young boy squarely for the first time. "That woman-like person said that you're extremely talented, and he truly wasn't afraid of being too hyperbolic. Anyway, why don't you guess? Guess why you should listen to me." If one looked carefully, one would surprisingly discover a hint of similarity between the two people. Song Jisun became even angrier. However, he restrained himself from lashing out. The man didn't keep Song Jisun guessing anymore, saying in an amused voice, "Why? It's naturally because I'm an extremely unfortunate person. I'm actually your uncle." Song Jisun was deeply stunned, with his face becoming slightly pale. The man in white ignored Song Jisun's changing expression. He placed both his hands on his jade belt and looked out the window, saying with a faint smile, "It's also because I'm the #1 martial artist in the Great Li Empire." If he had revealed this fact in another manner, it would have been even more impressive and stunning. However, the man would rather be the head of a chicken than the tail of a phoenix. He felt like it wouldn't be worth bragging about if there were someone placed above him, even if it were only 1 or 2 people. An expression of disdain spread across his face as he thought about the Confucian sage who was presiding over this place. He humped coldly. If they weren't in the place, he could easily kill someone like Qi Jingjun, an immortal from the 3 religions, with a single hand. Inside a thatched cottage of the school, Mr. Qi was currently listening to the young children loudly reciting a passage. He was sitting in an upright manner. This was a genuinely upright manner. Even his students like Song Jisun and Zhao Ya would find it difficult to understand the true essence of this position. There was a fundamental Confucian classic named Grand Etiquette that was the basis of establishing the religion and founding the sect. In this classic, there was a chapter called the Self-Cultivation chapter that specifically talked about how a noble and virtuous person should sit like a corpse, because it was such corpses that would be represented by dignified statues which accepted the offerings of others. As such, sitting like a corpse implied sitting in an upright and dignified manner. At this moment, it was as if Qi Jingjun had vaguely heard the silent thoughts of the man in white. He appeared nonchalant as he smiled faintly and said, "A martial artist ruling over a nation. Impressive, how very impressive." However, a white dragon disguising itself as a fish isn't a good omen. The sound of footsteps traveled over from Song Jisun's house. Lu Xianyang was just about to jump down from the wall, yet he heard a voice travel over before he could even see the owner of this voice. "Are you the disciple of the Treasure Creek Dragon Kiln's old man Yao? Is your surname Liu?" the person asked in a gentle voice. This person was none other than the kiln supervision official who was dressed in white. He looked over with a smile as he strode out of Song Jisun's house. Lu Xianyang froze upon hearing this, and he discovered that he surprisingly didn't have the strength to hop down from the wall anymore. He chuckled guiltily and replied, "Yes, that's me. When you went to the dragon kiln back then, Master told me to demonstrate a few things to you." The man nodded in reply. He looked the broad young boy up and down and asked frankly, "Young boy, do you want to leave this place and see the outside world? For example, joining the army? If you can endure this for 10 years, I guarantee that you'll become a powerful official. At that time, I'll personally organize a banquet in the capital for you to celebrate your achievements. How does that sound?" Song Jisun wore an extremely dark expression as he stood behind the man in white, and he tightened his grip on the old Dragon Rainbringer jade pendant that Fu Nanhua had given him. Right now, this young boy who had been slandered as an illegitimate child and bastard for many years was already aware of this man's true identity. Thus, he very clearly understood the weight behind this man's words. The promise to personally organize a banquet would be one of the most powerful life-saving talismans in the Great Li Empire. It would more so be a grand ladder that allowed Lu Xianyang to climb to great heights. Lu Xianyang racked his brain in an attempt to come up with an intelligent-sounding response. In the end, however, he stammered, "Thank you for your kindness. But I'm afraid that I can't accept B because I've already agreed to become Master Ruan's disciple. I can't go back on my words. P, please don't. Take note of this. It was as if Lu Xianyang's words were stuck in his throat. He couldn't remember the phrase no matter what, and he was so worried that his face became bright red. It's a greater man who does not take note of a lesser man's fault, Song Jisun reminded him in a seemingly understanding manner. The man in white simply smiled in response, not seeming to mind. "No matter. When you have the opportunity to leave this small town one day, you can go to the nearby Danyang Mountain Pass and look for a martial artist called Lu Linshi. Just tell him that it was the capital Song Chongjing who recommended you to join the army. If he doesn't believe you, tell him that Song Chongjing said that he still owes him 3,000 enemy heads from the Great Sui Nation." Lu Xianyang was in a daze as he nodded and replied, "Okay." The man smiled before turning around to leave. Song Jisun wanted to bid him farewell at the door, yet as if reading his thoughts, the man said without turning around, "Follow me to the kiln supervision office. I'm going to introduce you to someone." Song Jisun planted his feet and refuted with a dark expression, "I'm not going." To the ordinary residents of the small town, the office of the kiln supervision official was naturally a mighty place that was extremely difficult to visit. To this young boy who had grown up listening to others' slander, however, it was nothing less than a dragon's lair or a tiger's den. This was a mental trauma that he couldn't overcome. The man, who was always swift and resolute when dealing with outside matters, wasn't angered by the youth's stubbornness. He didn't stop, but he slowed down and said, "According to the intel provided by the spies, you've already met Prince Gao from the Great Sui Empire, correct? Are you aware that the Great Sui Empire's Gao clan are the mortal enemies of our Greatly Empire Song clan?" As a prince, he dared to come to this small town which is situated in the heart of an enemy empire. Meanwhile, as a fellow prince, you don't even dare to visit a small official residence in your own nation. Song Jisun's first reaction wasn't to ponder over the deeper meaning behind the man's words. Instead, he instantly turned around to look at Lu Xianyang. However, it was as if Lu Xianyang hadn't heard the man's words at all as he sat on the wall and massaged his limbs. The corners of the monarch's lips curled up into a smile as he walked through Clay Vase Alley. He had been given an unexpected surprise, as expected of someone from the Song clan. However, upon recalling that Song Jisun was that woman's son, the #1 martial artist and powerful monarch of the Greatly Empire couldn't help but feel slightly agitated and troubled. Song Jisun gritted his teeth before turning around and saying to the maidservant who was standing by the door, "I'll be gone for a little while. No need to leave lunch for me." Just as Song Jisun was about to leave the courtyard, he turned around and said with a smile, "Grab the pieces of loose silver from my bed and buy yourself the pair of dragon and phoenix ornaments from the Du family store. After all, there's no need for us to save money in the future." Jigui nodded before gesturing for him to be careful. Song Jisun smiled happily as he left in a carefree manner. After Song Jisun left, Lu Xianyang, who was sitting on the wall, asked carefully, "Jigui, what's Song Jisun's relationship with the kiln supervision official?" Jigui looked at the tall youth with pity in her eyes. Lu Xianyang couldn't stand it when she wore such an expression, and he said, "What? He's merely acquainted with the official responsible for overlooking the kills. Is that so impressive?" Jigui wore an emotionless smile as she went back inside to retrieve some animal feed. She then started to feed the chicken and her bunch of fluffy little chicks. Lu Xianyang couldn't help but feel dejected. He jumped down from the wall and shouted, "Qinping'an, let's go to the blacksmith. I'm not going to sit here and suffer in frustration." With her back to the wall, the young girl giggled and said, "Deities fight for incense, while humans fight for dignity. However, it's a shame that good-for-nothings can only have a stomach full of pent-up frustrations." Lu Xianyang boiled with anger, with even his ears becoming bright red. He walked up to the wall and punched it with ferocity, shouting, "Wang Zhu, I dare you to say that again." The maidservant scattered the remaining corn and vegetable leaves before clapping her hands clean and saying with a smile, "Who do you think you are? Why should I listen to you?" Lu Xianyang was rendered speechless as he looked at the young girl who was becoming more slender and beautiful by the day. He felt completely empty inside, and it was as if something inside him had been shattered. Qinping'an had already been standing at the door for a while, and upon seeing this, he hurriedly walked over and said in a soft voice, "Let's go." The two youths walked side by side in the small alley. "Qinping'an, am I really pathetic?" the tall young boy suddenly asked. Qinping'an pondered for a moment before replying in a serious voice, "The neighbors and residents in the alley all say that my mother was extremely kind and amiable, and they all say that my father was renowned for being a quiet and taciturn person. So, in my opinion, whether one is pathetic or not has nothing to do with whether others like them or not." Lu Xianyang wore a sullen expression, saying, "Then I'm even more pitiful. Even if I manage to own a dragon kiln in the future, or even if I manage to learn all of Master Ruan's skills, won't she still dislike me as always?" Qinping'an smartly kept his mouth shut, lest he add fuel to the fire. Walking along the familiar alley, Qinping'an suddenly recalled a memory. Back then, he and old Manya had followed a stream into the depths of a mountain. There, they had seen a Milu peacefully drinking water. It wasn't afraid of their presence, and after having its fill to drink, it continued to gaze at the stream with its head lowered, not leaving for a long time. Apart from its own reflection, there had also been a circling fish that didn't leave the entire time. Before leaving, Ning Yao had suggested to Qin Ping'an that he should leave the small town as soon as possible since he had already obtained a locust leaf. With the formless protection of the locust leaf, it was unlikely that he would face any grave dangers. However, she was unsure about Lu Xianying's situation and whether he would drag Qin Ping'an into any trouble. Thus, it was best that he didn't stick around for too long. However, Qin Ping'an insisted on staying until he personally witnessed Lu Xianying becoming Master Ruan's disciple. Only then would he be able to leave with an easy mind. Because if it weren't for Lu Xianying at that time, he would have already starved to death. Of course, Qin Ping'an also wished that Ning Yao could stay at his home until she fully recovered from her wounds. However, he hadn't dared to say this out aloud, afraid that she would take it the wrong way. "Will you refuse to sell that treasured armor your grandpa left you no matter what?" Qin Ping'an suddenly asked. "Nonsense. Of course I won't sell it, even if I die," Lu Xianying said with a righteous expression. He punched Qin Ping'an in the shoulder and said jokingly, "After all, I'm not a little miser like you." The tall young boy placed his hands behind his head and said, "Some things might be lost temporarily, yet they can be obtained again as long as one has enough money. However, there are other things that once lost will genuinely be lost forever." "I understand," Qin Ping'an said. When they were about to reach the end of Clay Vase Alley, Qin Ping'an suddenly heard Lu Xianying swear in anger. He pushed the thoughts out of his mind and looked up. His expression instantly became solemn. The person standing before them was Lu Zhengzhan, the young master of Fortune Street's Lu clan. Many years ago, it was none other than this person and his friends who had trapped Lu Xianying in this alley and almost beaten him to death. If it weren't for Qin Ping'an's cries for help, Lu Xianying, who had no relatives, might have truly been killed and tossed into an unmarked grave. At that time, Song Jisun had also been squatting on a wall and enjoying the spectacle. In fact, he had even added fuel to the fire. Afterward, however, he had told Qin Ping'an with an apprehensive expression that Lu Zhengzhan and the others' actions would be referred to as acting gallantly with personal feelings by people outside their small town. Lu Zhengzhan blocked Lu Xianying's path and said with a forced smile, "Don't worry, I'm not here to settle old animosities." Rather, Lu Xianying cut him off saying again, "Obedient dogs don't block their owner's path. Now, piss off." Lu Zhengzhan wore an awkward expression, yet he still forced himself to appear amiable as he said, "Lu Xianying, I genuinely have something I need to discuss with you. You ran away without even giving me an opportunity to explain last time. Could you at least listen to my proposal first?" Truth be told, it was through blows that we became acquainted with each other, and there's no need for there to be such hostility between us. Those customers and I are extremely sincere. Lu Xianying cocked his head and said with a sneer, "What, you've become addicted to the feeling of being someone else's puppet? Say, I find this quite strange. You, Lu Zhengzhan, come from the wealthiest clan in town, yet you've taken a liking to running around as those outsiders' lackey." Anger flashed across Lu Zhengzhan's face, yet he still forced himself to maintain a smile, causing his expression to appear extremely strange and comical. There was a hint of pleading in his voice as he said, "Lu Xianying, as long as you agree, they'll try to satisfy your request no matter what it is. For example, copper coins? Why don't you name a price? Say, 150,000? Or 200,000? Even if it's that much, I can still try my best to obtain it for you. 200,000. That's enough for you to buy half a residence on Fortune Street." Lu Xianying looked at him with disdain and said, 200,000? Are you trying to shoo a beggar away? And you call this sincerity? I suggest that you stop trying to deceive and swindle me. I still have important matters to attend to, so why don't you piss off to the side? Around the corner of the alley, an adorable little girl was sitting on the shoulders of a tall and solidly built old man. Next to them, a boy in a big red robe was holding onto the hand of his mother. He was at an age of innocence and naivety, yet the sinister and ruthless expression on his face was one that was in deep discordance with his age. Using the language of his hometown, he said, "Is this person from the Lu clan stupid or what? What's the point in keeping him? His mother shook her head and said with a gentle smile, "When bestowing favors upon others, one has to remember that occasional favors bring gratitude, while constant help breeds grudge. When doing business, the best way to maximize profits is to act like Lu Zhengzhan is acting now. It's important to get a feel for the other person's bottom line." "We need to go through so much trouble even with these lowly peasants?" the little boy asked in puzzlement. The woman smiled and replied, "The human mind is complicated and dark. This is the case regardless of one's cultivation. Even if the people in smaller areas are unknowledgeable, this doesn't mean that they're completely stupid too. If you think like this, you'll eventually suffer the consequences one day." "Oh," the little boy replied. "Since Mother is so familiar with the human mind, why don't you directly deal with him yourself?" "Take a look at our clothes," the woman explained patiently. "Regardless of which store we enter, as long as the store owner is slightly shrewd, they'll be unable to help themselves, but try to rip us off." The little boy sighed and mumbled, "It just feels stifling to hide like this." The woman squatted down and placed her hands on the little boy's cheek. Looking at his face, which was extremely similar to his father's, she said with a stern expression, "Remember this. Cultivating one's mind is also one aspect of cultivation. One should cultivate their strength in favorable circumstances, and one should cultivate their mind in challenging circumstances. Both are equally as important." The little boy pulled his head from his mother's grasp and huffed, "Not these meaningless principles again. How annoying!" The woman was slightly exasperated, yet she didn't continue to educate her son. Her son was extremely talented, after all, and his physique was also outstanding. There were more so 2 clans supporting him, so the path ahead of him was still an extremely long one. As such, even though he was slightly cold-hearted at the moment, this was something that could be slowly tempered and fixed with time. Trying to hasten this process would be the worst choice possible. The little girl felt slightly anxious as she listened to the boring conversation in the alley, and she said, "Grandpa Yuan, what will we do if that person refuses to sell it no matter what?" The old man, whose arms reached his knees like an ape, chuckled and said, "Then we'll have him die. I came here to deal with this exact situation. Otherwise, we would have wasted all that money to enter here. However, your safety will be an issue at that time, and I'll most likely have to leave you with the Song clan or the Li clan." Disregarding everything else, the old man would definitely be tossed out of the small town if he dared to kill a native resident. However, compared to their money silently disappearing down a drain, this would at least make a plop like a small stone being tossed into a pond. They would at least have something to show for it. Of course, this was the last resort, and the old man definitely wouldn't use it unless he was forced to. After all, regardless of how important that sword scripture was, and regardless of how highly the sword scripture was regarded by Sun Scorch Mountain, it was still nothing compared to the cultivation path of the little girl sitting on his shoulders. At the very least, this was the case for the old man. Of the 4 surnames and 10 clans in the small town, the Lu clan was the head. If one were to take into account the outside world, however, things would be the complete opposite. In reality, the Lu clan was the weakest of all the clans. This was because the empire supported by the Lu clan had been annihilated by 2 armies from the Great Li Empire. As a result, their standing in the Eastern Treasured Vile continent was now extremely precarious. Meanwhile, inside the alley, Lu Xianyang was listening to Lu Zheng'an babble on about becoming a wealthy official and having dozens of beauties around him and whatnot. And it was as if he were listening to Song Jisun expounding on all those profound principles and teachings. He was extremely ticked off. He took a step forward and pointed at Lu Zhengzhan, saying in a resolute voice, "That suit of armor is a relic passed down by my ancestors, so its value isn't something that can be measured with money. Even if you allow me to move to your house today, and even if you call me master from now on, I still won't consider selling it." "Lu Zhengzhan, have I made myself clear?" Standing alone at the entrance of Clay Vase Alley, Lu Zhengzhan stared intently at the young boy who wasn't showing a single ounce of fear toward him, even though his standing was far inferior. At this moment, Lu Zhengzhan felt like banging his head against a wall and killing himself. Not long ago, he had tried the same thing on the covered bridge, blocking Lu Xianyang's path as he headed to the blacksmith. However, he had failed to convince Lu Xianyang to sell the suit of armor. When he returned home, his grandpa had called him into a secret room after finishing his meeting with those esteemed guests. He hadn't threatened Lu Zhengzhen, nor had he spoken about any profound principles. Instead, he had simply pointed at the corpse under the white sheet and said, "Zhengzhen, Grandpa doesn't have any other wish. I simply wish that your brother's death wasn't in vain. After 7 days, I hope that you will have already left the small town. You can look at the outside world for your brother." Tears suddenly welled up in Lu Zhengquan's eyes, and he sobbed, "Lu Xianyang, I'm begging you, okay?" Lu Xianyang was stunned. The wealthy young boy appeared increasingly fragile and helpless, with his lips quivering as he sobbed and said, "Please? I'll kneel and apologize, okay?" There was a thud as Lu Zhengzhen fell to his knees. He then started to kowtow to Lu Xianyang. A man's knees were plated in gold, so how could they kneel to others? Yet, Lu Zhengzhen was extremely earnest as he kowtowed, with his head banging against the ground. Around the corner of Clay Vase Alley, the little girl's feet were lightly drumming against the chest of the old man as she pondered about all the mountains they had passed on their way here. She contemplated which one she should take home. Meanwhile, the little boy was taking great pleasure in Lu Zhengquan's misfortune, casually asking, "Mother, has he gone mad? Are we really going to take such a madman with us when we leave? Just how embarrassing will that be?" The woman wore a complicated expression. She recalled the many mysterious people and strange events that she had seen with her own eyes, but she eventually swallowed her words and said with a shake of her head, "We won't." Lu Xianyang was at a complete loss. Not even in his dreams would he have imagined Lu Zhengzhen dropping to his knees and kowtowing to him. This was the eldest grandson of the wealthiest clan, yet he was actually kowtowing to him just like that? Lu Xianyang was in two minds at this moment. However, the young boy in sandals who had been observing their conversation the entire time suddenly tugged at his sleeves and lightly shook his head. However, Lu Xianyang couldn't bring himself to be so heartless, and he muttered, "That's far too unsympathetic." Qin Ping'an's expression remained resolute. Meanwhile, the tall and burly youth was already showing signs of relenting. At this moment, it was surprisingly the young boy in straw sandals, whom Ning Yao viewed as a foolishly kind person, who was appearing extremely cold-hearted and unsympathetic. Qin Ping'an's instinct told him that if Lu Xianyang had agreed to sell the suit of armor before Lu Zhengzhen fell to his knees, he might have suffered some hardships anyway, but he definitely wouldn't have faced any life-threatening danger. Now, however, he had already become trapped in the same situation that Qin Ping'an had faced before. If it weren't for Mr. Qi's interference at that time, he would have killed Fu Nanhua and then been killed himself, either by Dawn Cloud Mountain or Old Dragon City. Making the situation even worse was the rule that Ning Yao had told him about. Since Lu Zhengzhen was native to the small town, Mr. Qi most likely wouldn't be able to stop him if he or his clan wanted to kill Lu Xianyang. A thought occurred to Qin Ping'an, and seizing the opportunity while Lu Zhengzhen was still kowtowing with all his might, he lowered his voice and said to Lu Xianyang, "If nothing else works, you can just pretend to accept his proposal first. We can then deal with it after you visit Master Wan and become his disciple." Lu Xianyang nodded in understanding. He turned around and said to Lu Zhengzhen, "Brother, why don't you get up first? Stand up and talk. Fucking kowtowing like this. Just what the hell is this?" Lu Zhengzhen didn't stand up. However, he raised his head, revealing his swollen forehead that was covered in dirt. Lu Xianyang's voice was filled with exasperation as he said, "However, you need to go home and have a serious meeting with those people first. You need to come up with a satisfactory offer and stop trying to fool me. After all, I'm not a fool. An offer of 200,000 copper coins? To say nothing of whether I'm being screwed over or not, don't those people feel like they're degrading themselves?" Lu Zhengzhen slowly stood up, smiling and saying, Yes, that's indeed the case. Lu Xianyang, as long as you're willing to sell it, I'll be your brother in the future. I don't mind whether you accept me as a brother or not, but I, Lu Zhengzhen, will definitely consider you as a brother." Lu Xianyang walked over and wrapped an arm around Lu Zhengquan's shoulders. As they walked toward the end of the alley, he said in comfort, "Brother Lu, you need to share your fortunes and fun with me in the future. When we complete this deal, I'll have to invite you over for a drink no matter what." Lu Zhangzhen rubbed his forehead with his hand as he laughed heartily and said, "Easy. There's nothing difficult about having a drink. And that'll have to be on me. How can I allow you to pay? Then it's settled. Don't try to argue otherwise, or else I'll get angry." Lu Xianying laughed and responded, "I always knew Brother Lu was a kind-hearted person. I'll definitely be hanging out with you in the future." Qin Pingyan walked behind the two of them, leaning slightly closer to the wall of the alley. He stared intently at the entrance of the alley. With an old subordinate leading the way, the man in white led Song Jisun to the guest hall of the kiln supervision office. The subordinate said that Mr. Li, who had traveled over from an academy far away, had already been waiting here for around an hour, and that he was about to head over to the private school to visit a senior. Song Changjing didn't comment on this, and he simply asked, "The assassin who died in the alley. Have you found out whose underling he was yet?" The subordinate hesitated upon hearing this. Song Changjing furrowed his brows. The old man hurriedly bowed and said in fear, "The Fortune Street Song clan." Song Changjing chuckled coldly and said, "They don't know to give me a little surprise?" Sweat poured down the old man's back. Song Jisun remained silent, yet there was a fervent look in his eyes. Inside the school, Qi Jingjun lightly put down the book that he was reading. Turning around, he saw that there was a handsome young man standing there, a hat on his head and a Confucian robe on his body. He smiled but didn't speak. Qi Jingjun wore a tranquil expression, appearing solemn and dignified. In the small town, a bald man in strange clothes walked along the street barefoot. He looked haggard, and when he arrived beside the iron lock well, he looked down and placed his hands together in prayer, closing his eyes and saying softly, "When Buddha looks at a bowl of water, what he sees is an innumerable amount of organisms." Atop a mountain outside the small town, there stood a person on the thick and sturdy branch of a towering ancient tree. There was a tiger talisman hanging on his waist and a sword strapped to his back, and he was currently gazing at the outline of the small town in the distance. Outside the small world that the small town belonged to, there was a profoundly long path that seemingly led up to the heavens. It was surrounded by clouds and mists, making it impossible to see anything in the surroundings. A Taoist nun wearing a yellow crown slowly rode up the path on the back of a white deer. There was another handsome Taoist beside her, with his footsteps as light and carefree as floating clouds and flowing water. Two large fish with long barbels swam around him, one red and one green. Confucians, Buddhists, Taoists, and martial artists, the three teachings and one art form were about to gather together in the small town. In the blacksmith forge next to the creek in the south of the small town, the father and daughter continued to swing their hammers and forge iron, sending sparks flying into the surroundings in a dazzling display. Holding the sword billet in his hand, the man said to the young girl with the ponytail, "Don't go to town for the next few days." The young girl's movements instantly became much weaker, and it was as if all of her strength was flowing away with the snacks from the small town. The man laughed in anger, saying, "How impressive." The young girl transformed her grief and frustration into power, furiously swinging her hammer and smashing it into the searing red sword billet. Brilliant sparks flew into the air, illuminating the young girl's face and making her appear like a goddess of flames. After walking out of Clay Vase Alley, Lu Xianyang and Qin Pingyan saw two groups of people standing to their left and right. There was a little girl riding on the shoulders of a tall and burly old man, and there was also a haughty little boy in a big red robe standing beside a calm and dignified-looking woman. However, Lu Xianyang was extremely composed as he walked between them. The old man noticed this, and he felt like the young boy's disposition was somewhat similar to that of a great general. Meanwhile, the young boy in straw sandals tried his best to hide his guarded and overcautious expression, and this made him appear far inferior in comparison. After bidding farewell to the two of them, Lu Zhongzhen obediently stood there with fear and trepidation, reporting in a careful manner. Lu Xianying said that if the esteemed immortals offer a fair price, he'll be sure to part reluctantly with his family treasure and sell it to you. The woman glanced at the old man from Sun-Scorched Mountain and asked with a smile, "Senior Yuan, what do you say?" The old man pondered for a brief moment before replying in a solemn voice, "We can't make the same mistake 3 times, so we'll do as Lu Xianyang suggested and give him a profound amount of wealth. Sun-Scorched Mountain can offer him the position of true disciple. Apart from this, I can also privately loan him an immortal treasure for 100 years. As for you, the Light Breeze City Sioux clan, you can give him whatever you want." The woman was astounded. True disciples of Sun-Scorched Mountain already enjoy an extremely noble standing. Yet, Senior Yuan is still going to loan him an immortal treasure? Perhaps this young boy is a cultivation prodigy who was accidentally missed by the porcelain buyers when he was 9 years old. The old man ignored her questions, and he simply smiled at the little girl and said, "The stalls in this small town have all kinds of histories and origins. Young mistress, you can take a look around, and you might even be able to obtain some hidden treasures." Being the young child that she was, the little girl excitedly commanded her steed to run. The old man, who was the chief honored member of Sun-Scorched Mountain, laughed heartily as he started to run forward slowly. He looked much like a moving mountain. The little boy chuckled and said, "How mighty of Sun-Scorched Mountain." The woman gestured for Lu Zhangchun to return first. Meanwhile, she strolled down the street with her son, explaining, "Apart from that ordinary and main path of ascent, Sun-Scorched Mountain also has a special sword path. Passed down until today, they've already opened 6 paths to ascend to the peak. In other words, Sun-Scorched Mountain has produced 6 genuine sword immortals who have attained Tao." The little boy sneered and said, "What does it matter how many sword immortals they've produced? That's nothing but history. How much can it help them?" Looking at the Qi refiners who have the right to enter this small town, even those who came after us, which of their clans and sects hasn't been powerful before? Holding the little boy's hand, the woman smiled and said, "Then do you know? In the next 100 years, 2 new sword paths will reach the peak of Sun-Scorched Mountain. Moreover, the special thing about the girl who's the same age as you is that she can freely walk around the sword peak that's brimming with sword qi. In fact, the length of time that she can stay there for rivals that of the grand elders of Sun-Scorched Mountain." The little boy faltered upon hearing this. He immediately stopped in his tracks and said in anger, "If that stupid girl's so capable, why didn't you tell me earlier, mother? I wouldn't have targeted her all this time and caused her to always retort at me for no reason. If she became my wife in a few years, and if we became Tao partners further down the track, wouldn't that have greatly benefited our Light Breeze City?" Looking at the fury on the little boy's pretty and still childish face, the woman didn't get angry. Instead, she smiled and elaborated, "Both you and that little girl are supreme cultivation prodigies who have a chance to ascend to the upper 5 tiers. Thus, the threads of fate between you two are far more complicated than normal. Purposefully trying to seek a predetermined result will only make things more unsatisfactory. In any case, do you really think that she hates you with all her heart?" The little boy frowned and said, "Otherwise? We'll let nature take its course," the woman murmured in a gentle voice. The little boy suddenly became serious and he muttered, "Mother, I don't like the person behind Lu Xianyang. In fact, I hated him at first sight." "How come?" the woman asked in curiosity. The little boy carefully mulled over this for a moment before replying, "That person's a little strange, and he's different from Lu Zhengzhen who understands everything, and also different from Lu Xianyang who understands nothing. Also, I especially hate his eyes." The woman merely treated this as her son being childish, so she said, "We can't do as we please in this small town. However, you just have to think about this. When this realm collapses, what fate will the people who live here face? Thinking about this will make you feel much better." The little boy nodded in understanding. At the same time, he repeated the 2 words that he had uttered when he had first seen the young boy in straw sandals, "measly ant." After leaving the small town, Qin Ping'an and Lu Xianyang quickly saw the covered bridge. Lu Xianyang casually asked, "Why did Song Jisun's family build this covered bridge? So be it if they wanted to build a bridge. But why did they have to build it over the old stone arch bridge? I heard that the stone arch bridge wasn't demolished either, so it's as if a new robe has been pulled over it." Say, will it feel hot in summer? Ha ha. In the end, the tall and broad young boy started to laugh at his own joke. A plaque with 4 golden characters was hanging on the side of the bridge, and it was unknown who had written them. The characters were extremely large, and they read, "Rising winds, crashing water." As the 2 youths walked up the stairs, Lu Xianyang heavily stomped his foot a few times and said in a mysterious manner, "Old Man Ya once told me that there's something strange under these stairs." He said that when they were building this covered bridge, Song Jisun's father ordered the workers to dig a massive hole late one night. They then buried a large porcelain jar that was as tall as a person. Do you not find this frightening? Chen Ping'an huffed and said, "What's so scary about that?" The 2 of them walked onto the covered bridge that offered some shade. Lu Xianyang lowered his voice and whispered, "Do you think it's because several people have drowned in that deep pool under the covered bridge? So they needed to invite monks and Taoists over to suppress the sinister aura." Qin Ping'an never spoke carelessly about matters regarding gods and spirits. Lu Xianyang received no response, and this quickly dampened his interest in the topic. This wooden-covered bridge had only been built a few years ago, so one could still smell the coat of paint and the faint fragrance of wood. The main pillars and beams were all constructed from wood that had been felled from the mountains and forests that had been sealed for countless years. Transporting the felled trees had been extremely difficult, especially since the small creek that ran around the mountains wasn't deep enough for them to float on. Thus, the workers could only transport them during heavy downpours when the mountain became muddy and slippery. If they weren't careful, they would fall into the raging waters and face perilous danger. Fortunately, no one had slipped into the creek and drowned at that time. Some also said that Mr. Chi from the private school had personally gone over to help, teaching the workers how to properly transport the felled trees. Thus, it was thanks to Mr. Chi that everything had gone smoothly. When they arrived at the stairs on the northern side of the covered bridge, Lu Xianyang suddenly sat down on a long bluestone slab. Qin Ping'an had no option but to squat down beside him. Lu Xianyang smiled and asked, "If it weren't for me, would you and Song Jisun have become very good friends?" Qin Ping'an shook his head and replied, "Perhaps our relationship would be better. However, it wouldn't be by much." Lu Xianyang was extremely curious and asked, "Why? You 2 are neighbors, and you're also around the same age." Truth be told, Song Jisun does like to talk about profound principles all the time, and the way that he speaks is indeed quite unpleasant to the ear. However, I don't remember him ever doing anything too offensive. Moreover, you're also an extremely amiable person, so why don't you 2 get along? Qin Ping'an smiled and replied, "Let's talk about something else. When we get to the blacksmith forge, you definitely can't goof around like you always do. Whether or not you can keep that suit of armor passed down by your ancestors depends on whether you can become Master Ruan's disciple." I know. Qin Ping'an, to be honest with you, you really have to change your habit of nagging others in the future. Otherwise, I'll be annoyed to death by you. Lu Xianyang leaned back, resting his head on the topmost step of the covered bridge. He gazed at the blue sky and said, "You covered great distances with Old Man Yao, and you also ascended many tall mountains with him. When you're standing at the top of those mountains, just how far can you see?" Qin Ping'an casually plucked a licorice root from the ground and flicked the dirt from it before placing it in his mouth and chewing. His words were slightly unclear as he replied, "It was probably the year before last when we ventured the furthest. It took Old Man Yao and me around 10 days to get there and back. We needed to take a detour around a dozen or so restricted areas, and in the end, we arrived before a strange mountain that was terrifyingly tall. You might not believe it, but when we looked down from the waist of the mountain, what we saw was already a layer of clouds and mists. In the end, Old Man Yao and I finally managed to climb to the top of the mountain. However, Lu Xianyang waited for him to continue. Yet, after waiting for half a day, he still didn't hear another peep from Qin Ping'an. He turned around and said with a smile, just like taking a shit, who the hell pulls their pants up halfway? Are you going to continue or not? Qin Ping'an was feeling slightly sentimental, and he said softly, "You also know that Old Man Yao had a very poor impression of me. He almost never discussed any important principles with me, and he also wasn't willing to teach me the true skills of pottery firing. Old Manya didn't like speaking to me, so every time we entered the mountains, he would only say very few words to me for the entire journey. When we reached the mountain peak that time, however, Old Manya was probably feeling good, so he spoke a few more words to me. He told me to simply look at the scenery over there and not to speak about it after we left the mountain. He said that a person should put their head down and work with their full effort. If one only knew how to talk, they would bring themselves nothing but shame even if they managed to leave our small town. Lu Xianyang tried to comfort him, saying, "I'm not trying to make excuses for old man Yao, but he didn't detest you even if he did dislike you. In fact, he was like that to everyone else, and it was only me that he treated a little bit differently." Qin Pingan nodded and agreed. "That's why I've always been extremely thankful toward old man Yao. You've babbled on about so much, yet you still haven't told me what you saw." Lu Xianyang suddenly blasted in anger. Qin Pingan pointed to the east. The mountain that we climbed was already extremely tall. However, when we arrived at the peak and looked into the distance, what we saw was an even taller mountain in the east. I can't even describe how tall it was. Lu Xianyang cursed. "So what you saw was nothing but a mountain? And here I was thinking that you saw a fucking flying immortal or something." Qin Pingan pondered for a moment before saying with a longing expression, "What if there really is an immortal on that mountain?" Lu Xianyang chuckled and asked, "Qin Pingan, do you think that immortals also need to eat and shit?" Qin Pingan stroked his chin and replied, "If immortals also need to eat and shit, that seems a little unreasonable." Lu Xianyang ruthlessly smacked Qin Pingan's head before leaping up and running away. As he ran, he didn't forget to shout, "Did an immortal just shit on your head?" Lu Xianyang hadn't controlled his power at all, causing Qin Pingan to feel a little dazed at this moment. However, he didn't think about pursuing the tall and broad young boy. Instead, Qin Pingan stood up and muttered to himself, "Is thunder the snoring of immortals? When it rains, that can't be the piss of immortals, right? Otherwise, we're far too pitiful." Qin Pingan quickened his pace and caught up to Lu Xianyang in no time. They continued to chatter and jest, and before long, they finally arrived at the blacksmith forge next to the creek. Including the mud huts and thatched cottages, there were around 7 to 8 buildings in the surroundings. In Qin Pingan's eyes, these were all bags and bags of copper coins. There was also a large number of youths from the town currently digging wells, with many of them being disciples from the dragon kiln, just like Lu Xianyang. Without work at the dragon kilns, there was naturally no more food in porcelain bowls bestowed by their emperor. Thus, those who were able to find work at the blacksmith and earn themselves some food in an iron bowl were already extremely fortunate. However, according to Lu Xianyang, most of these people were only temporary workers helping with odd jobs here and there. He said that Master Wan would only take a few in-house disciples at most. As for the others, they would at best only become long-term workers. Lu Xianyang waved his hand and declared, "You can wait for me here. I'm going over to greet Master Wan, and I'll see if I can bring you around to witness the sight of iron being forged. TSK, I guarantee that you'll be frightened to death if you see his daughter swinging her hammer and forging iron." Qin Pingan stood there and waited for him, not wandering around on his own. Looking around, he could see that there were already 7 wells taking shape, with frames and walls sitting around the wellheads. In some wellheads, people continued to climb out with baskets on their heads. Qin Pingan squatted down by habit as he looked at the busy workers, and he took a pinch of soil and slowly rubbed it between his fingers. The soil felt slightly moist, yet it wasn't actually water-characteristic soil. Instead, it was the complete opposite, and it was fire-characteristic soil. However, it was the bottom type of fire-characteristic soil. According to Old Man Yao, this type of soil was called the 7th-month fiery star soil. This type of soil would naturally become cool, and it wasn't too dry either. It was also extremely workable, and this ensured that the walls of the well wouldn't collapse too easily. This was a good thing. Even though Master Wan wasn't an expert when it came to digging wells, it was very clear that he wasn't an amateur either. It was just that Qin Pingan was slightly confused about why he needed so many wells in this small area. Qin Pingan grinned as he turned around to look at the creek. Right now, in the eyes of this young boy in straw sandals, This nameless creek was like a treasure trove full of gold, silver, and copper coins. However, when he finished collecting snake gall pebbles tonight, Qin Ping'an would secretly go to Clay Vase Alley and visit Gukan's home. He would then follow Gukan's instructions and dig up the treasure that he had hidden at the bottom of the large water vat. Gukan had left in a hurry at that time, so he hadn't been able to tell Qin Ping'an very much. He had simply said that even his mother didn't know where this treasure was hidden. As he thought about that snotty little kid, Qin Ping'an couldn't help but want to laugh. In the past, Qin Ping'an had been a little kid who would follow Lu Xianying around everywhere. He would follow him to fish, catch snakes, and steal eggs from bird nests. After he became a young boy, he had also ended up with a little kid who would follow him everywhere. To the young boy with no relatives, one was like his older brother, and one was like his younger brother. He needed to repay one, and he needed to look after the other. Thus, even though Qin Ping'an's life had been full of hardships all these years, he didn't find it painful or miserable at all. After a short while, Lu Xianying ran back over with a bamboo basket on his back. Qin Ping'an was watching the workers digging the wells, yet he almost face-planted into the ground when Lu Xianying came over and kicked him in the rear. Glancing back and realizing that it was Lu Xianying, Qin Ping'an decided not to make a fuss about this. Lu Xianying casually said, "It's all done now. Master Wan told me to stay put and not run around for the next few days. I'll be digging wells in the morning and forging iron at night. After 2 weeks or so, I'll become his first disciple in this small town." What was it called again? The opening disciple or something. I also found a bamboo basket for you, and I can use it to help you collect those pebbles. We can start from the blacksmith forge and work our way up to the covered bridge. Let me say this first, though. I can't help you when we get to the pit at the Azure Cow Ridge. Master Wan said that he'll break my legs if I dare to venture north or west of the covered bridge during these few days. Lu Xianying dragged Qin Ping'an across and wrapped his arm around his shoulders, saying, "Master Wan said that our belongings in the small town won't go missing. He also said that those outsiders have to abide by an extremely strange rule. They're allowed to make fair trades, and they're also allowed to trick and cheat others. In fact, they're even allowed to act like beggars who pick at scraps. However, they're definitely not allowed to become thieves. He said that the heavens here won't doze off or shut its eyes. Instead, it's staring at us the entire time. Doesn't that sound creepy to you? At least I find it extremely creepy." Lu Xianying suddenly warned Qin Ping'an, "You can continue to stay at my place, but don't let me find out that you've already sold my suit of armor when I return." Qin Ping'an hammered Lu Xianying's chest, causing the tall young boy to hurriedly let go of him. Lu Xianying rubbed his chest a few times before finally managing to catch his breath, scolding, "You're like a skinny little monkey, so where in the world is your strength coming from? Perhaps your strength rose exponentially because you traversed long mountain paths with old Man Yao? Or because you went deep into the mountains to chop firewood for several months?" Qin Ping'an smiled and replied, "No matter what, I can run back to town faster than you even with a basket full of rocks on my back." Lu Xianying shot him a sideways glance and suggested, "Then let's see which of us can hold our breath for longer underwater." When they neared the creek, Qin Ping'an bent down and rolled up his pant legs, saying, "I won't compete with you if it's only about a single breath." Before entering the water, Qin Ping'an plucked some spring grass from the creekside and laid it on the bottom of his bamboo basket. He also said that he would need to put in a new layer for every 20 pebbles that they collected. Lu Xianying was so annoyed that he was just about to toss the bamboo basket to Qin Ping'an. However, Qin Ping'an stopped him, saying that if he were to carry the basket instead, Lu Xianying would definitely toss the pebbles into it in a careless manner, being such an impatient person and all. That would cause his heart to ache. Lu Xianying was almost about to drop the basket and leave. These colorful pebbles had been worthless for hundreds upon thousands of years, yet when it came to Qin Ping'an, they were suddenly fragile and precious now. And Qin Ping'an even dared to complain about him not being gentle enough? In the end, however, the tall and broad youth still waded into the creek in a begrudging manner. Walking next to Qin Ping'an, they would thoroughly sift through the bottom of the creek to look for those colorful pebbles. This section of the creek was knee-deep, and there were also some slightly deeper areas that would reach up to their waist. On occasion, they would also come across some small pits that were as deep as a person. Generally speaking, it was in these areas that the larger pebbles were gathered. These were also the areas where Lu Xianyang could show off his skills. He would first hand the bamboo basket to Chen Ping'an, who would often be squatting on a large rock. Afterward, Lu Xianyang would hold his breath and dive to the bottom of the creek, picking out the snake gall pebbles from the cracks in the large boulders or from among the layers of rock and sediment. Of course, Chen Ping'an was also capable of doing this as well. However, it was far more difficult for him, and it would take him much more time and effort than Lu Xianyang. They were yet to arrive at the covered bridge, yet the bamboo basket was already 70 to 80% full. Among the snake gall pebbles, there was one that was dark green in color, and it had taken Lu Xianyang 3 dives and much difficulty to retrieve. It was as large as a hand, and there were also golden specks scattered throughout the pebble, along with wave-like patterns. This pebble was solid and heavy, and when Chen Ping'an rubbed it with his hands, it felt as if it were flickering with a vigorous aura. As long as one wasn't blind, they would understand that this was no ordinary pebble. In the end, the two youths sat side by side on a large rock in the creek. Lu Xianyang leaned back and used his arms to prop himself up as he gazed at the flowing creek, asking, "Chen Ping'an, have you thought about leaving this small town in the future?" "Not at the moment," Chen Ping'an replied. "If I want to leave, I'll need to have enough money first, after all. Moreover, what will happen to my house after I leave? There will be no one to look after it for me. So what will I do if it suddenly collapses one day? In any case, my parents' graves are also here, and I need to remove the weeds around them from time to time." Lu Xianyang was slightly exasperated as he exclaimed, "Why do you always think about all these useless things? How uninteresting. No wonder Song Jisun said that you're destined to be stuck here forever." Chen Ping'an turned around, smiling and asking, "Do you still remember what I told you last time? About that tree?" Lu Xianyang huffed and replied, "What's so incredible about a tree sprouting from a grave? In any case, that's the grave of another branch of the Chen clan. It's got nothing to do with you, Chen Ping'an." Chen Ping'an crossed his legs and said softly with emotion, "I wonder if there are many people with the surname Chen outside our small town." "I don't know about the outside, but I know that there are only a few cats and dogs with the surname Chen in our small town," Lu Xianyang replied. "Apart from you, the other members of the Chen clan are all servants for the 4 surnames and 10 clans. This has been the case for generation after generation. What's funny, however, is that these people are always bowing and humbling themselves before their masters, yet when they head out and see other people, they immediately put on a different expression and act as if they're superior." So, Old Man Yao was correct. If you also went and became their servant, then this branch of the Chen clan that stayed in the small town could be considered completely finished. According to Old Man Yao, there had originally been 2 different branches of the Chen clan in the small town. However, one of the branches had moved out a very long time ago. Meanwhile, the branch that Chen Ping'an belonged to had also flourished at some point in time. However, this was far too long ago. In fact, even Old Man Yao couldn't say how long ago it was. Was it 500 years? Or 800 years? Or was it 1,000 years? Afterward, this branch split into several sub-branches, and the overall population also started to decline gradually. Their fortune was perhaps all taken away by the other branch of the Chen clan. Thus, the bloodlines started to disappear one by one, resulting in many graves being forgotten and abandoned. Not only that, but many of the mountains where the graves were located were sealed off and turned into restricted areas by the kiln supervision officials sent over by the imperial court. The final time Old Man Yao brought Chen Ping'an into the mountains, he pointed to an area when they passed by a certain mountain, telling him that this was the burial place of the ancestors of the other branch of the Chen clan. The feng shui there was especially good. As for the branch that Chen Ping'an belonged to, Old Man Yao said that even the immortals wouldn't be able to find their ancestral burial grounds. For the past few centuries, this branch of the Chen clan hadn't produced a single competent person. They were all impoverished families, and their only achievement was that they hadn't bowed down and become servants of the 4 surnames and 10 clans. Qin Ping'an had secretly visited that ancestral burial place once, and apart from weeds, he had also seen many foxes and rabbits. However, he hadn't been able to find a grave. There was a tree that he didn't recognize though, and this was a short tree that was nowhere near as tall as the old locust tree. Weeds growing everywhere, foxes and rabbits hopping around, lonely and helpless and single tree sprouting. Qin Ping'an shook his head and said, "Before my mother passed away, she made me swear that I would never become a servant for those large clans and families. I could become a beggar, but even if I starved to death, I should never become their servant." Before your mother passed away, didn't you also swear that you would never become a disciple at the Dragon Kills? Lu Xianyang instinctively said. The young boy in straw sandals wore a dejected expression. He didn't throw a retort, nor did he become enraged that his broken promise had been exposed. Lu Xianyang felt a little guilty. However, he wasn't the type of person to apologize, so he could only pretend that nothing had happened. He stood up and said, "All right, I'm leaving now. I need to go back to dig some wells." "Oh, that's right. I'll annoy Master Wan a bit more and try to have him hire you as a temporary apprentice. At that time, it'll also be much easier for you to collect these pebbles." "There's no hurry," Qin Ping'an replied. "We'll talk about it after those two groups of people give up and leave the small town. In the meantime, I'll help you look after your house." "Say, why can I escape danger if I become Master Ruan's disciple?" Lu Xianyang asked in curiosity. Qin Ping'an pondered for a moment before replying in an uncertain voice, "Perhaps it's like the arrival of a sudden downpour. You have to find some cover no matter what, right?" Lu Xianyang turned around to glance at the blacksmith forge, saying, "Who do you think Master Wan is? He doesn't look like a very powerful person. Can he really suppress those two groups of people?" "You can't judge a person by their appearance," Qin Ping'an said in comfort. Lu Xianyang glanced at him. "Qin Ping'an, you look like a poor person, so are you really a poor person?" Qin Ping'an grimaced, rendered speechless by these words. Lu Xianyang stood up and asked, "Do you want me to carry it to the covered bridge for you?" Qin Ping'an shook his head and replied, "No, I'm fine. It's not too heavy anyway. Remember to return the bamboo basket to me next time." After saying this, Lu Xianyang directly jumped down from the large rock. He advanced briskly in the creek, sending splashes of water everywhere. Qin Ping'an slung the bamboo basket over his shoulders and carefully climbed down from the large rock. After returning on shore, he slowly made his way toward the covered bridge. After walking for a while, he heard footsteps behind him. Turning around, he saw that it was Lu Xianyang. Under the warm sunshine of early spring, the tall and broad young boy snatched the bamboo basket from the young boy in straw sandals. He slung it over his own shoulders and said in a teasing voice, "Looking at you from the distance, it was as if you were a pitiful ant carrying a large boulder. I decided to show some mercy and kindness, so I returned to help you carry the basket to the covered bridge." The two youths walked amid the spring breeze. "Qin Ping'an, if I become successful in the future, I'm definitely going to head out to take a look. I'll also find myself a wife who's even more beautiful than Jigui, and I'll also drink the best wine and live in the largest house. I'll also ride the quickest horse. I'll visit a mountain that's as tall as the heavens, and I'll journey to a river that's countless times bigger than this creek. In conclusion, I definitely won't stay in this small place my entire life and wait for death." Walking through the gentle spring breeze, the tall young boy dreamed about a bright and exciting future. Meanwhile, the young boy in straw sandals chewed the straw in his mouth. One person spoke and one person listened. When Qin Ping'an returned to Lu Xianyang's house with the basket of pebbles, he picked out his favorite few pebbles and took them to the wing room like always. As for the other pebbles, he left them in the kitchen. After locking the house door and courtyard door, he ran back to Clay Vase Alley. When he arrived home, he saw the young woman in black sitting in the courtyard and enjoying the sun. After greeting her, Qin Ping'an started to brew a pot of medicine. There was a hacking sound coming from next door, and Qin Ping'an couldn't help but find this strange. Even though Song Jisun had no parents to look after him, he had never been short on food or clothes. In fact, he had always had a lot of spare money. Perhaps he wasn't as well off as the young masters from the Four Surnames, but his wealth and lifestyle could definitely rival those from the 10 clans. Books and brushes, small and exquisite trinkets, beautiful and elegant ornaments. These were extravagant things that Chen Ping'an had never heard of before, much less seen. From time to time, a new addition would adorn Song Jisun's study. In fact, Song Jisun and his maidservant never had to perform any dirty or tiring tasks. Pickling vegetables was too pungent, so Song Jisun didn't allow his maidservant Zhuhou to pickle any vegetables. Chopping firewood was also too tiring, so Song Jisun would directly buy bundles upon bundles of firewood to use. He would also buy bags and bags of the best charcoal. When Chen Ping'an brought the bowl of medicine to Ning Yao, he could surprisingly still hear the intermittent sound of hacking coming from next door. While Ning Yao drank her medicine, Chen Ping'an couldn't help but walk to the courtyard wall and get on his tippy toes. He discovered that Zhuhou was hacking at a person with a kitchen knife. This was a small wooden person. Chen Ping'an had worked in the kilns for many years, so he had seen many high-quality products and also chopped countless amounts of wood. Thus, he was able to determine the quality of the wood with a single glance. The wood was as smooth and glossy as jade, and this signified that the wooden person was definitely an ancient item. Moreover, the wooden person was covered in red and black dots. However, it had already been hacked into several pieces by Zhuhou. The young girl suddenly turned around. Upon seeing Chen Ping'an, she raised her sweaty and dirty arm to wipe her face before forcing a smile and saying, "Oh, you're back. I wanted to borrow a hatchet from you before, but your guest wasn't willing to open the door for me." Chen Ping'an faltered upon hearing this, and he said, "I'll get it for you right away." Hatchets are different from kitchen knives, so don't swing it too forcefully at the start. Otherwise, it's very easy to slip and hurt yourself. Sitting on a small stool, the exhausted young girl waved her hand. All right. Now hurry up and get the hatchet for me." When Chen Ping'an returned with the hatchet, Zhuhou was already standing at the courtyard wall. She smiled and asked, "Do you know what that is?" Chen Ping'an shook his head and replied, "No." Zhuhou didn't tell him the answer. Instead, she sat back down on her small stool and continued to hack at the wooden person. Chen Ping'an was extremely worried as he looked at her awkward movements and incorrect postures. However, since she didn't ask for help, Chen Ping'an didn't try to offer any uninvited advice either. Turning around, he found that Ning Yao had already left the courtyard. Chen Ping'an recalled something and quickly entered his house. He then placed something on the table before the young woman in black. This was a snake gall pebble that was just large enough to wrap one's hand around. It looked like a frozen piece of honey, with its color brilliant and its patterns delicate. Ning Yao was slightly baffled. Chen Ping'an smiled and said, "It's a present for you, Ning Yao." The young woman in black who always carried her saber suddenly asked, "You like this one the most?" Chen Ping'an was put in a tough spot, and he could only say, "This one is probably my fourth favorite. I've already put the other three away." Only after hearing this did Ning Yao accept the pebble. She picked it up with 2 fingers and held it above her head, causing the rays of sunshine filtering through the window to shine on the pebble. She raised her head and squinted her eyes, carefully examining the delicate patterns inside the pebble. She continued to look at the pebble. Chen Ping'an continued to look at her. Deep in the night, a young boy stealthily crept through Clay Vase Alley like a silent and nimble cat. He went into Gu Kan's home, and he found the large water vat that was placed in the corner of the courtyard. After squatting down, he found that many of the originally neat and tidily placed snake gall pebbles had already been taken away by someone. It was as if someone had discovered their value before him. Gukan was the only weirdo in the small town who liked to collect snake gall pebbles, and no matter how many pebbles he found at a time, he would only take a single one home. He would only keep his favorite one. Thus, after collecting them for a long time, he was only able to gather 50 to 60 snake gall pebbles. He used these pebbles to cover the gaps in the bottom of the water vat. Chen Ping'an pushed aside the snake gall pebbles that had already lost their luster. When he saw no dig marks on the bottom of the water vat, he finally breathed a sigh of relief. He started to dig with his hands. When he eventually felt parchment paper, his heart jolted, and his movements became slower and more careful. In the end, he retrieved the item that was wrapped in the parchment paper. By the looks of it, this was a book. After hiding it under his clothes, Qin Pinyin scooped the soil back into the water vat. Looking carefully at the remaining snake gall pebbles, he confirmed that they were all dead. Compared to the pebbles that Qin Pinyin had collected from the creek, they were completely different in terms of both color and pattern. The pebbles that Qin Pinyin had collected were like lively infants full of vitality, while the pebbles sitting around the water vat were like elderly people fast approaching death. Qin Pinyin pondered for a moment before deciding to leave Clay Vase Alley from the direction of his home. When he arrived outside Song Jisun's courtyard door, he heard the creak of a door being opened. Qin Pinyin had no option but to knock on his own door and shout, "Ning Yao, have you gone to sleep yet? I came back to get something." A light quickly lit up in the house, and the young woman in black walked over to open the door for Qin Pinyin. Next door, Ji Gui slowly walked out with a thick and yellowing book in her arms. When she arrived in the courtyard, she saw flickering lights and shadows in Qin Pinyin's house, and she couldn't help but shake her head and click her tongue in wonder. It was as if she had caught a couple engaged in an illicit affair. She skipped and hopped as she walked down Clay Vase Alley by herself. Her golden eyes with twin pupils appeared especially ice-cold and holy in the dark of the night. This made the slender and shapely young girl seem like a flood dragon that was swimming through thin cracks in the rock. If she managed to leave the small alley, it was as if she would enter the rivers and transform into a dragon. Even though Ning Yao allowed Qin Pinyin to enter the courtyard and even the house, her expression was slightly dark as she sat beside the table and leaned against the scabbard of her saber, which she lightly drummed her fingers along. After confirming that Ji Gui had entered the alley, Qin Pinyin finally explained with an awkward expression, "I went to Gu Kan's house to get something, yet Ji Gui coincidentally decided to go out just as I was passing by. I was left with no option but to hide here for a while. Ning Yao, please don't misunderstand." "What thing?" Ning Yao asked. Qin Pinyin hesitated for a moment before retrieving the book wrapped in parchment paper. "I'm not sure either." Ning Yao turned around and instructed, "Open it and have a look first. Then you can decide whether you want to tell me or not." Qin Pinyin nodded and sat down opposite her. He then unwrapped the layers of parchment paper, causing dirt to continuously fall onto the table. In the end, an ancient book appeared before him. There were only 2 characters on the cover of the ancient book, and Qin Pinyin only recognized one of them, Mountain. He placed the ancient book on the table before rotating it around and pushing it toward Ning Yao. He then asked in curiosity, "Ning Yao, what's this character?" The young woman turned around and glanced down. "Shaking," she replied. "Mountain shaking?" This was the title of the ancient book. Mountain shaking? Ning Yao furrowed her brows, and she reached over to grab the ancient book. Surprisingly, however, it was pulled back by Qin Pinyin. The young woman froze, and a sense of fury started to well up inside her. It was as if she had never been humiliated like this before. She was the mighty Ning Yao, and to say nothing of the fact that her father and mother were both 12th tier sword immortals, she had also been regarded as a top-notch sword prodigy ever since birth. After leaving home and traveling around for so many years, she had only ever lost during sword battles or spell technique battles. However, no one had ever insulted her character like this before. This was nothing but a crappy book, so did she, Ning Yao, need to flip through it or obtain it through underhanded methods? Ning Yao grabbed the hilt of her saber and narrowed her slender eyes. Slender eyes and red lips. This was an apt description for the young woman sitting before Qin Pinyin. If one looked closely, one would realize that Ning Yao was, in fact, an extremely beautiful young woman. However, she was radiating with a gallant and resilient aura that completely suppressed her womanly beauty. Qin Pinyin's next words had the magical effect of turning a terrible situation into a good one. However, the young woman was so stifled that she almost suffered an internal injury. "Ning Yao, I obtained this book from Gu Kan's house. Even though I don't consider this as stealing, I definitely have to return the book to Gu Kan in the future. Since we're friends, I can allow you to read through it. However, I hope that you can keep its contents to yourself." The young woman took a deep breath. She then slammed the table before glaring at Qin Pinyin and saying, "Read through what? You can read it yourself." I'm not interested." When she heard Qin Pingin's next reply, she truly didn't know whether to laugh or to cry. "But Ning Yao, I can't read. Can you teach me?" The young woman suddenly changed her mind, and she said with a chuckle, "You're not afraid that I'll take advantage of you? Just think about it. Guqin is clearly someone who's received a profound amount of ancestral blessing, so much so that even the natural sword talent Lu Xinying can't compare to him. In the thousands of years of history of the small town, few people can compare to Guqin. Thus, just how incredible will this book be? This is a treasure that he carefully hid away. Aren't you afraid that I'll develop sinister thoughts after seeing it? Aren't you afraid that I'll snatch this extremely valuable book for myself?" The warm yellow light from the flickering candle illuminated the young boy's faint smile. He didn't try to explain anything. Ning Yao humped before shuffling over and gesturing for Qin Pingin to sit next to her. After waiting for a long while, however, Qin Pingin still didn't show any signs of moving. Ning Yao chuckled in anger and growled, "I can defeat 100 of you with a single hand." After saying this, she chuckled to herself, "Perhaps you're afraid that I'll take advantage of you?" Qin Pingin was slightly tense and uneasy as he walked over to sit next to her. However, Ning Yao was still immersed in the comment that she had made just then. She murmured to herself, defeating 100 Qin Pingins with a single hand. This saying has a wide range of applications. When I see someone and spar with them, if I manage to defeat them, I can say, "You only have the strength of 3,000 Qin Pingins, yet you still dared to battle with me." Yeah, that seems fairly impressive. When I come across a ferocious beast or sinister WRM, I can also tell myself that these evil beasts are equivalent to 30,000 Qin Pingins, so I have to flee as quickly as possible. Haha, very nice, very nice. Qin Pingin was completely baffled. The young woman sitting next to him had suddenly started to chuckle stupidly to herself. The chuckling young woman made the impoverished young boy suddenly feel like he was an extremely wealthy person. At this moment, the young boy and young girl didn't realize that the joking phrase, defeating 100 Qin Pingins with a single hand, would eventually become a weighty and powerful phrase in the future. This would be especially true when the young boy in straw sandals was no longer a young boy. The more time that passed, the more this would be so. Ning Yao finally came to her senses. She coughed before sitting up straight and picking up the book. After quickly flipping through a few pages, she closed the book and used a finger to tap the cover twice. She then turned to Qin Pingin and said, "This is a fist technique called mountain shaking. According to the rules of the cultivation world, you can refer to this book as the Mountain Shaking Guide." "And then?" Qin Pingin asked with an eager expression. Ning Yao fought back the urge to roll her eyes, and she forced herself to appear more serious as she flipped open the book again. Her slender finger slid along the page, and she read, "There exists an insect in my hometown called the paifu. Ref. Paifu is a type of large ant. /ref. Unlike others of its ilk, it does nothing but transport mountain rocks into the water for its entire life. My fist technique decides not victory and loss, but life and death. It places emphasis not on movements, but on intent. Upon mastery of all 6 stances, one shall obtain profound power. A single move, and deep wounds to the heart and soul shall your opponent suffer. Though never honored in parallel with the most paramount fist techniques of this age, it remains my firm belief that the Mountain Shaking Guide shall have its place among the martial arts techniques of the world. Fated person, I hope you can promote and bring glory to this fist technique." Ning Yao forced herself to remain patient as she read the introduction to Qin Pingin. This was a thin book, with the entire guide only containing a mere 6 fist technique stances. However, the introduction wasn't short at all. After reading the introduction, Ning Yao pushed the book back to Qin Pingin. She patted his shoulder and said in a perfunctory manner, "Make sure to look after it." Qin Pingin nodded and carefully placed his hands on the 2 sides of the book. Ning Yao wanted to burst into laughter when she saw this. Was the book going to grow legs and run away? Or was Qin Pingin afraid that it would trip and fall off the table? Qin Pingin vigorously rubbed his right hand on his sleeve. Only then did he open the book and read through the introduction. He then flipped through the remaining pages that were decorated with text and diagrams. In any case, he couldn't understand anything that he was reading. Ningyao sat sideways with one arm resting on the table. She looked at the young boy and said in a teasing manner, "Do you feel like you've struck gold? Are you going to use a gold hatchet to chop wood and a gold bowl to eat your meals in the future?" Qin Ping'an didn't look up. Instead, he continued to carefully analyze the diagrams and incomprehensible characters as he replied in a frank manner, "When I saw the expression in your eyes, I already knew that this wouldn't be an especially powerful fist technique. However, that doesn't matter. This is already good enough for me." Ningyao frowned and replied in an equally frank manner, "I have indeed seen and heard of many impressive things before. Apart from these, however, I can only determine whether something is good or bad. As for how good or how bad, that's quite hard to say." Qin Ping'an looked up and asked, "Then is this mountain-shaking guide considered good, but not too good?" Ningyao huffed and blurted, "I don't know how to describe just how terrible this crappy fist technique is." The young boy in straw sandals blinked in reply, with a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. It was clear that he already knew the answer. He was merely joking around with the young girl. Ningyao reached down and unsheathed an inch of her saber and spoke in a threatening voice, "You want to be hacked at, do you?" Qin Ping'an looked down at the saber and green scabbard hanging on her waist, and he complimented sincerely, "It's beautiful." Ningyao calmly accepted this praise. "The swords and sabers that I choose are naturally not bad." Qin Ping'an gazed at her, and he slightly envied and admired her confidence and demeanor. Even though she was the same age as him and was in an unfamiliar place, she still managed to rise like a bright and unstoppable sun no matter what situation she faced. Using his keen sense, Qin Ping'an had already discovered this when he had witnessed Daoist Lu's extremely cautious manner when dealing with her. Qin Ping'an couldn't help but exclaim, "How nice would it be if the sunshine could be swapped for copper coins?" Ningyao didn't know where he was coming from, and she said in astonishment, "Qin Ping'an, have you gone mad thinking about money?" Qin Ping'an hurriedly changed the topic, flipping to the first diagram in the book and asking, "Ningyao, can you help me read the words on this diagram?" Ningyao mulled over this for a moment. She didn't refuse and simply asked, "Do you know why I was able to determine that this fist technique was only SOSO with a single glance?" Qin Ping'an shook his head. "I am indeed curious." Ningyao smiled in response and decided to turn around to face the young boy. She crossed her legs before pointing to the book and explaining in a patient manner, "The secret techniques of martial artists and cultivation techniques of cultivators are usually recorded in 3 different ways. The first type is like this mountain-shaking guide, where they're written on ordinary paper. Regarding how long they can last, that depends on one's luck. To say nothing of war or calamities, just the weather and insects alone will cause the book to slowly decay and rot, right?" Qin Ping'an nodded in realization. Ningyao continued, "Thus, an unwritten rule appeared when it came to recording techniques through this kind of written method. The more valuable the contents, the more valuable the material it would be recorded on. This is similar to how you wouldn't place an imperial jade seal in a box made out of cheap wood." Qin Ping'an mulled over these words. Ningyao hesitated for a brief moment before deciding to be honest with Qin Ping'an. The next type of recording is an unwritten one which focuses on teaching through instruction and example. Such a method is usually used when it comes to the important skills and techniques of sects and clans. These are usually secrets that can't be revealed to others. Or perhaps they're techniques that can only be taught to males and not females, and so on. In fact, even direct disciples and in-house disciples won't necessarily be able to obtain the complete true inheritance. This is the importance of true inheritances. Ningyao sighed before continuing. As for the last type, the focus is on teaching in a manner that can only be felt and understood in one's mind, but cannot be explained in words. For example, let's look at the 2 forces that entered the small town this time. There was Kai Jinjian and Dawn Cloud Mountain, where she comes from, practices something called observing the Sea of Clouds. The Sea of Clouds is vast, and the iridescent light that they radiate is especially unique, and they more so contain an abundant amount of spiritual energy. The Qi refiners in Eastern Treasured Vile Continent refer to these clouds as beauties in the sky. Some of these clouds and iridescent lights can transform into the shape of previous masters and ancestors, and those who are fated can even communicate and interact with them. Meanwhile, when it is so fated, it's said that the sword spirits of ancient ancestors from different peaks will also appear at the peak of Sun-Scorched Mountain. This is a mountain peak that's brimming with sword intent. These sword spirits will display the sword Dao, and as for who can witness this isn't determined by one's age, status, or cultivation. Ningyao finally said, of course, there's also no notion of definite rank between the three methods of recording. For example, if one uses the first method to carve characters on a jade plate or on bamboo plates harvested from the bamboo sea in the 72 blessed lands, it's naturally a different matter altogether. Apart from this, there's also a myriad of other mysterious items. If you advance far enough, you'll eventually encounter a pleasant surprise. In this vast world, all kinds of strange and peculiar things exist. In the future, it's best that you leave this small town and take a look around in the outside world. There's no need to dream about venturing beyond Eastern Treasured Vile Continent or venturing beyond this world, but you need to at least try to venture to the borders of the Great Li Empire. Qin Pinyin nodded again and again in understanding, but it was clear that his mind was still on the fist technique before him. He pointed to a character and asked, Ningyao, how do I read this? The young girl was extremely ticked off and replied, run along. Qin Pinyin wore a skeptical expression. Ningyao glared at him as she pointed at a character, and she said, it genuinely means run along. This fist technique was created while observing the rain in the Great Li Empire. The fist stance appears as if it's running along, and the fist aura appears as if it's an unstoppable downpour. After falling into the mortal world, the fist aura runs along the imperial walls of the Great Li Palace, crashing down with vigor. Qin Pinyin focused on the fist stance diagrams that had been seemingly drawn in a single stroke. It looked like they were standing in formation on the page, and because they were all squished together, each diagram wasn't very big. In fact, the drawings weren't very meticulous to begin with. It was thanks to Qin Pinyin's good eyesight that he could still see them clearly under the dim yellow light of the candles. Listening to Ningyao's words, which he couldn't fully comprehend, he murmured, this fist technique sounds quite impressive and mighty. Ningyao stuck her head over and looked at the diagrams, nodding and saying, there's a fist technique that's been passed down in the cultivation world for thousands of years without getting lost, and it does seem quite similar to this mountain-shaking fist technique. Qin Pinyin turned around and asked in curiosity, how so? The dim yellow light illuminated the slight twitching of the young girl's long and slender eyebrows. It was like the branch of a peach tree slightly bending under the gentle spring breeze. She held in her laughter and replied, there's a fist technique suitable for both old and young in the cultivation world, and this fist technique is called the bastard fist technique. You simply throw a few wild and uncontrolled punches, and it's guaranteed that your unpredictable attacks can defeat even the most experienced master. The young boy was slightly exasperated as he said, who jokes around like this? Qin Pinyin mulled over this. In fact, wasn't Gukan extremely skilled at this type of fist technique? He recalled that Gukan's mother had also seemingly been involved in an unsavory skirmish before. This was in front of a cosmetic shop on Apricot Blossom Alley. At that time, Gukan had only just learned how to walk. Meanwhile, because his father was from out of town, and because he was always not at home, he had already been largely forgotten about by the neighbors on Clayvase Alley. The other women living in the alley had started to feel worried that their husbands would involuntarily pause whenever they walked by the house of that widow. Indeed, just the female clothing drying on the bamboo poles would be enough to easily fish the soul of the men away. Sometime afterward, Granny Ma had gathered 5 or 6 women together to visit Gukan's house. Gukan's mother had suffered quite a bit in that battle, but Granny Ma and the others hadn't managed to gain an advantage themselves either. Both sides had suffered heavy losses. However, the longer that went on, the less that Gukan's mother was able to maintain this balance. This was because she was a lone soldier, after all, so it was extremely difficult for her to defend against attacks from all directions. In the end, even her clothes had been torn to shreds. They were already thin to begin with, so it was inevitable that swathes of her skin had ended up exposed. This caused the jealous women to become even wilder with rage, clawing and biting and doing everything they could to attack Gukan's mother. The men in the alley could only gulp with their eyes wide open when they saw this. Fortunately, Qin Ping'an had been returning home from the dragon kiln at that time. Moreover, Gukan's family had also been helping him for all these years. Thus, he had immediately run over to help Gukan's mother, blocking the vicious and underhanded attacks from the other women. From the beginning to the end, however, Qin Ping'an had never dared to retaliate and attack the other women. This wasn't because he was afraid of causing trouble. Instead, it was because he was afraid that he might kill them with a single punch. At that time, the young boy had already traversed countless mountains and rivers under the shouts and scoldings of old man Yao. He had only been 12 or 13, yet he had already walked a longer distance than most elderly residents of the small town. After that fight, Qin Ping'an and Gu Kan's mother had sat on the doorstep of the courtyard. Meanwhile, Gu Kan had been locked inside the house the entire time. This was most likely because his mother hadn't wanted him to see her in such a disheveled and sorry state. When he turned around, Qin Ping'an had pointed to the corner of the woman's mouth. Pursing her lips, the woman had casually used a thumb to wipe the blood away. Meanwhile, Gu Kan had been crying hysterically in the house, shouting for his mother. The woman had smiled at the young boy, but in the next instant, tears had started to stream down her cheeks. The next day, an unwilling little boy had started to follow him around. "What are you thinking about?" Ning Yao's question interrupted Qin Ping'an's reminiscing. After going to Lake Shujian with the river severing True Lord, will Gu Kan and his mother truly be able to enjoy a better life? Qin Ping'an asked. "You feel like their life in Clay Vase Alley wasn't good?" Ning Yao replied. Qin Ping'an thought about this for a moment before replying. Gu Kan wasn't the most well-behaved child, and he was also extremely young to begin with, so he definitely wouldn't have felt like life was too hard. His mother, however, she most likely didn't view the small town as a good place to live. This is especially the case since she didn't like a single woman from Clay Vase Alley or Apricot Blossom Alley. Moreover, I feel like she was never meant for a place like this to begin with. She also felt extremely vexed that she was stuck here. In old man Yao's words, this would be called a restless mind. When a man has a restless mind, that's a sign that his aspirations lie in a land far away. When a woman has a restless mind, that's a sign that she might be considering an affair. However, I feel like this saying isn't correct. Ning Yao suddenly sat up straight, slamming the table and saying, "What nonsense are you still uttering? Do you want to learn this fist technique or not?" Qin Ping'an was given a fright, and he said, "Ning Yao, please continue." Ning Yao huffed and said, "There's no point in telling you about cultivation, since doing so would be pointless. After all, it's impossible for you to become a cultivator. So, I can only teach you about martial arts." Qin Ping'an was just about to say something, yet the young girl had already continued. All martial arts in the world are divided into 9 tiers. Of course, there are also people who say that there's a 10th tier above the 9 tiers. This is just like the Go officials raised by the large empires. Ning Yao was in a much better mood at this moment, and she asked with a smile, "Qin Ping'an, do you know what Go officials are?" Qin Ping'an shook his head in honesty. Ning Yao wore a radiant expression as she said, "The 9th Dan is the highest ranking for a Go expert, and this is equivalent to the 1st rank being the highest ranking for an imperial official. However, someone in 100-year prodigies will be granted the title of 10th Dan Go expert. These people will then enjoy all kinds of peculiar and unique titles. However, the Go official in your Greatly Empire is extremely embarrassing. From what I've heard, the 9th Dan Go official in the Greatly Empire is only equivalent to a 7th Dan Go expert in the Great Sui Empire. In the entire Greatly Empire, only a single person with the nickname of Embroidered Tiger is viewed as a proper opponent by the Great Sui Empire." "Oh, that's right. Do you know what Go is?" Qin Ping'an nodded and replied, "Yes, I do. I even know some of the rules. However, I don't know how to play it myself. Although, Song Jisun and Ji Gui do have a Go set at home." "Oh, is that right?" the young girl replied in disappointment. After the young girl explained everything in such a roundabout manner, The young boy was still unable to grasp what the 9 tiers meant. As if also realizing that her explanation was a bit iffy, the young girl cleared her throat and said in a solemn manner, "My mother told me that each of the 9 tiers is like ascending to a new height. However, even if you reach the peak of the 9th tier, the scene that you see is as if you're standing atop a mountain. But when you look up, what enters your gaze is the mountainside of another mountain." Qin Ping'an mulled over this for a moment before saying, "I understand." This was because the young boy had personally experienced this before. The young girl paid no attention to whether he truly understood it or not, and she continued, "The 9 tiers of martial arts are divided into 3 major tiers: physique refining tier, chi refining tier, and spirit refining tier. Each of these 3 major tiers contains 3 separate tiers, and not a single one of these tiers can be skipped if you want to ascend to the peak. You more so can't make any mistakes during this process of ascension. The firmer your footsteps, the better. In terms of speed, this actually isn't very important. This is in contrast to cultivation. Of the 3 tiers of the physique refining tier, the first tier is the mud molding tier. The meaning of this tier is already quite clear from its name. Just like Clay Vase Alley, this is a tier where one is still rough and unrefined. However, upon reaching the peak stage or consummate stage, one will be like the mud statue of a deity. Even though they're created from mud, they'll still have a hint of an extraordinary aura. Their chi will descend to their dantian, and they'll become as immovable as a mountain. This can be regarded as a tier that truly brings one into the world of martial arts. In conclusion, the essence of this tier is dispersing and setting. From one's performance in this tier, others will be able to easily determine their martial arts talent, their comprehension ability, and the skills of their master. The second tier is the wooden fetus tier. This signifies that your physique is transforming from a rough state into a more refined state. When you reach the consummate level, the lines on your skin will become precise and orderly, just like the words carved on a talisman, and just like the snake gall pebble that you've collected from the creek. The patterns inside it are already completely different from ordinary pebbles. The purpose of this tier is to open the mountains, whereby one has to expand their meridians and transform a narrow path that can only fit a single sheep into a wide arterial road that can fit numerous horses and carts. The quality of a martial artist's aptitude will be determined in this tier. As she said this, the young girl raised the snake gall pebble that the young boy had given her above her head. She gazed at the beautiful pebble that was being illuminated by the dim yellow light, and she said in a soft voice, "The final tier of the 3 tiers of the physique refining tier is the mercury tier. One's blood will become as viscous as mercury, thick but light at the same time. One's chi and blood will then condense into one. If one wants to ascend beyond this tier, they'll need to face a tribulation called mud deity crossing the river. Whether or not one can pass this tribulation and ascend to a new height depends on their skill and fortune." Qin Ping'an was slightly befuddled as he listened to this. He stared at the candle in a daze, with his heart and mind wavering and flickering along with the flame. Ningyao yawned before resting her arms and head on the table and saying in a lazy voice, "And that's about all." The 3 tiers of the physique refining tier are already able to stop the footsteps of 80% of martial artists, preventing them from advancing any further. You have to understand that those who are poor study books, while those who are rich study martial arts. Apart from my hometown, this principle holds true everywhere else. Judging by your wealth and your comprehension ability, I'd say that you can burn incense and thank the heavens if you ever manage to reach the 2nd tier. So how should I practice this fist technique? Qin Ping'an asked. Ningyao raised an eyebrow and replied, "We'll talk about it tomorrow. I'm getting a bit tired now. Then I'll grab the basket and go collect pebbles." "See you tomorrow, Ningyao," Qin Ping'an said. "If you trust me, then you can leave the fist technique here first. I'll have another look at it and see if there's anything missing or if there are any traps." Qin Ping'an smiled and replied, "Sure thing. However, remember to be careful with the book. After all, I still have to return it to Guken in the future." Ningyao frowned and muttered, "How many times do you have to repeat this?" Qin Ping'an smiled as he went to the corner to pick up his bamboo basket. When he left, he didn't forget to say, "Ningyao, don't forget to lock the door." The young girl was resting on the table, so she didn't turn around and instead simply waved her hand, saying in a listless manner, "I know, I know. How are you even more talkative than my father?" The young boy was as quick and nimble as a swallow as he disappeared down the alley. When Ningyao estimated that Chen Ping'an had probably left the alley, she immediately stood up and angrily glared at the mountain-shaking guide as if she were glaring at a mortal enemy. However, her intense aura quickly deflated, and she sat down and sprawled herself across the table again, a troubled expression on her face. "How in the world am I going to teach this?" she murmured to herself. "I was born with a first-rate sword physique, so I naturally didn't need to traverse such a path myself. In fact, I can't even remember the names of the 365 acupoints. In terms of how to circulate one's breath and aura, I already knew how to do this in my mother's womb." Ningyao scratched her head in grief. A timid voice suddenly sounded at the door at this moment, saying, "Ningyao." Ningyao's body was stiff as she slowly turned around to face that familiar figure that was asking for a beating. She remained silent, and her expression was stern. Chen Ping'an gulped and said apologetically, "I was afraid that you would forget to lock the door, so I came back to remind you again. Also, if you get hungry at night, I can go to Lu Xianyang's place and make some snacks for you first. I can bring them to you and then go to the creek." Ningyao waved her hand in a sweeping motion. Chen Ping'an immediately ran away. As Chen Ping'an ran to the creek, the only thing on his mind was the first stance of the fist technique. The moving fist would lead one's movements, their feet never leaving the ground. As if wading through mud, and as if advancing through snow knee-deep, one would move forward in a slow and steady manner. The young boy didn't realize it, but when he attempted to practice the first stance of the fist technique, even the pattern of his breathing was involuntarily changed. The young boy had a wild thought at this moment. If he practiced these stances in the creek, wouldn't the effect be even better? There were two seals sitting before Qi Jingzhen, both of which had been carved from the finest snake gall pebbles. They weren't large, nor had characters been engraved onto them yet. During the day, a young scholar with a gentle temperament had visited the school and had a private conversation with him. The Confucian scholar from far away had asked him, "Mr. Qi, do you want to inherit that person's dying wish? Do you want to bring peace and fortune to the world?" At the time, Qi Jingzhen had answered, "Allow me to think over this." This clearly wasn't a very satisfactory answer. However, the renowned young Confucian scholar hadn't tried to pressure Qi Jingzhen into giving him an answer. Instead, he had chatted about the small town's customs and the events outside the small town with Mr. Qi, someone whom he had admired for a long time. He had then bade farewell. From the beginning to the end, the young Confucian scholar had never once asked about how to deal with the jade tablet. However, Qi Jingzhen knew that it was only this Confucian scholar from Eastern Treasured Vile Continent's Academy who would be able to tolerate such an answer. Meanwhile, the Golden Boy and Jade Girl from the Taoist sect, the Dharmapala from the Mahayana and Hinayana Buddhist sects, and the representative from the martial arts world all wouldn't give Mountain Cliff Academy any face. They more so wouldn't listen to Qi Jingzhen's desire. Thus, they would definitely retrieve their treasures without a shred of hesitation. However, he had already anticipated all of this. Qi Jingzhen sat upright with a carving knife in his hand. He was surprisingly conflicted at this moment, and he wasn't sure what characters to engrave on the seals. Die for a noble cause, choose righteousness over life, seemed like too grand a principle for the young boy. It wasn't suitable, nor was it a good omen. However, the phrase, "be peaceful of the mind, be upright of conscience," also seemed to be a little too elusive. However, if he carved other random phrases, would that appear too insincere? Qi Jingzhen turned around to glance at the night sky. Like bright pearls adorning a dark curtain, stars dotted the dark sky. Qi Jingzhen became lost in thought. He finally came to his senses after a long time, and he grabbed a seal and started to engrave it. In the end, he carved the characters, "Tranquil mind begets enlightenment." The word tranquil was especially powerful and lively, and it was as if it were all-encompassing. Qi Jingzhen lightly placed the seal down, with the engraved side facing up. Qi Jingzhen felt extremely relieved. Something tugged at his mind, and he casually flicked his sleeve, causing his desk to quickly transform into mountains and waters. Qi Jingjun focused his gaze, and what he saw was a young boy and a young girl sitting side by side in a rundown house as they discussed the 9 tiers of martial arts. Above the 9 tiers of martial arts, there existed a 10th tier. Qi Jingjun had already finished reading 10,000 books long ago, so he was naturally very familiar with the cultivation world and the martial arts world. Qi Jingjun always wore a stern expression, yet at this moment, the hint of a smile tugged at the corners of his lips. The Confucian sage, who was overlooking this world, decided to play a small and harmless joke. He carved 3 characters on the second seal. Qin Pinyin felt that if he collected pebbles in the morning in the future, he could start from the blacksmith forge where Lu Xianying was. He could then continue upstream all the way until he reached the covered bridge. Thus, for tonight, he decided to start from further upstream compared to last time. This way, he would be further from the covered bridge and the green stone cliff that people often referred to as the Azure Cow Ridge. Indeed, the latter place was where he had encountered the young girl in green last time. Moreover, because of this decision, Qin Pinyin would avoid an encounter with Song Jisun and the kiln supervision official. On the covered bridge, the plaque reading, "Rising winds, crashing water," hung high. On the surface, the man in white and wearing a jade belt was nothing more than the new kiln supervision official. In reality, however, he was actually the most powerful prince of the Great Li Empire. Following his lead, Song Jisun also arrived before the steps leading up to the covered bridge. Before coming here, not only had he bathed and changed in the kiln supervision office, but he had even attached a scented satchel and a dragon-shaped jade pendant to his waist. The latter was made from ordinary material, and its color was already faded and unexceptional. Surprisingly, it was the old Dragon Rainbringer jade pendant that was superior in terms of both omen and quality that Song Chongjing had ordered him to remove. He wasn't allowed to wear it no matter what. There were 3 incense sticks in Song Jisun's hand. Standing before the steps, the young boy was at a loss for what to do. Song Chongjing turned around and reached over, lightly rubbing his fingers over the 3 incense sticks. The incense sticks immediately started to smoke. Kneel down and face the plaque. Then kowtow 3 times and place the incense sticks in the ground. After that, you're all done, the man casually said. Even though Song Jisun was puzzled, he still did as his uncle from out of nowhere commanded. He held the incense sticks as he kneeled down and kowtowed. Even though the man had spoken in a casual manner, his expression immediately became solemn and complicated when the young boy kneeled down before the covered bridge. As he looked at the young boy kowtowing, a deeply concealed hint of loathing more so flashed across his face. After placing the 3 sticks of incense in the ground and standing up, Song Jisun asked, "Is it really okay to offer incense here?" The man smiled and replied, "It's merely a ritual, so there's no need to overthink it. From now on, you need to learn how to deal with all kinds of different situations. Otherwise, you'll be so busy that your head will want to explode in the future." His expression became serious as he continued, "But don't forget this either. This covered bridge is the origin of your dynasty." Song Jisun's lips were blue, and it was hard to say whether this had been caused by the chilly spring wind. The young boy purposely tried to act relaxed as he said, "It's not good to throw these words around so casually, right?" The man rested one hand on his stomach and one hand on his belt as he laughed heartily and said, "That's naturally the case when we return to the capital. Here, however, it doesn't matter too much. There's no guard dog outside the temples, nor are there the wild dogs of the cultivation world. No one will latch onto me and try to bite me all over." "You're also afraid of being criticized by others?" Song Jisun asked in curiosity. The man retorted, "I've already defeated all opponents and become peerless in the Great Li Empire. If there's nothing that I'm afraid of, won't I be in an even more comfortable position than the person on the throne? Do you think that makes sense?" Song Jisun mulled over this, and after hesitating for a brief moment, he still decided to ask, "Then are you hiding your abilities and biding your time? Or are you purposefully ignoring an opponent to appear more important?" Song Chongjing couldn't help but chuckle upon hearing this. He pointed at the young boy who was full of vigor, shaking his head and saying, "You truly dared to utter such treasonous words. You're still far too naive when it comes to what can be said in what situation. Whether you go to the capital in the future, or whether you go to some immortal sect to temporarily keep a low profile, I still suggest that you don't speak in such a willful and wanton manner. Otherwise, you'll definitely bring disaster upon yourself." "I'll keep that in mind," Song Jisun replied with a nod. The man pointed at the plaque with golden characters and said, "Rising winds, crashing water. Rising winds, crashing water. Let me ask you, how does the water crash and rise?" "I don't know," Song Jisun immediately replied. "Knowing is knowing, and not knowing is not knowing. Such a mindset is one of wisdom indeed," Song Chongjing muttered. "What a crock of shit." Intellectuals love this kind of wishy-washy nonsense. Even when they fart, they have to come up with a poem with 9 verses and 18 twists. The man became slightly less crude when he faced the young boy, and he said, "If I remember correctly, throughout the 3,000-year history of this small town, the water level in this creek has never risen higher than the tip of that rusty sword, regardless of how powerful a flood occurs. An old man who lives near the Iron Lock Well on Apricot Blossom Alley does indeed stand under the locust tree and tell us about this all the time. Is there a deeper meaning behind this?" Song Jisun asked in puzzlement. The man pointed far into the distance, toward the area where the creek flowed down from the mountains. He smiled and said, "Inside the mountains, the snakes have their own Tao. Inside buildings and houses, the rats have their own path. As for the rivers and creeks, the flood dragons residing within naturally have their own Tao as well." The man put down his finger and explained in patience, "In fact, there are many areas in the Greatly Empire where it is accustomed to hang a sword under a bridge. However, those copper coin swords, peachwood swords, or talisman swords are only able to block the mountain flood dragons and forest pythons from entering the river a single time. They're unable to block them twice. Sometimes, due to the lowly cultivation of those who place the swords, they're unable to block the flood dragons and pythons even once. They instead enrage the flood dragons, causing the bridges to collapse after the floods even though they could have initially continued to stand. The sword will also vanish without a trace. Only the sword here." The man fell silent as he said this. Song Jisun forcefully stopped himself from asking. The man sighed and continued, "Only the sword here wasn't placed to target flood dragons or whatnot. Ever since the first day, it was placed here to suppress the exit of the dragon locking well. The so-called exit is that deep pool under the covered bridge. The sword hangs above it to prevent the dragon chi from dissipating too quickly and forcefully causing this small world to explode." Song Jisun directly went to the root of the problem, asking, "Did that last true dragon in the world genuinely die?" Song Chongjing chuckled and said, "During that dragon-slaying battle 3,000 years ago, countless cultivators were wounded and killed. In fact, there were even casualties among the sages of the 3 teachings and the sect masters of the 100 schools of thought. Do you think they were all brain dead? Or do you think the sages were all as dumb as dogs even after living for all those years? Did you really think they would purposefully spare that true dragon and raise it like a harmless pet? Perhaps they were unable to comprehensively kill that true dragon." Song Jisun retorted. "So they could only use a stalling tactic and try to kill it slowly? Even though I don't know about the plans and ambitions of those sages from several thousand years ago, I can easily guess that the true dragon was no easy foe to deal with at all." The man shook his head, but also nodded afterward, saying, "You're half correct. The true dragon is indeed dead. However, when it comes to its true identity and significance, the description, not easy, can't even begin to describe it." Song Jisun wanted to say something, but he refrained from doing so. To sum things up, the Greatly Empire went through all that planning and sacrifice for nothing more than the characters on this plaque, "Rising winds, crashing water." It was all for our future adventure into the south. The man walked up the steps and said slowly, "If you ask me why the sages decided to slay the true dragon 3,000 years ago, it will truly be quite difficult for me to answer this question. If you ask me why you were tossed into this place, and why you're a noble prince of the Greatly Empire, however, I can indeed answer some of your questions." Song Jisun's head was lowered, and it was hard to see his expression. Since the young boy didn't ask, the man naturally wouldn't offer any uninvited explanations either. When he arrived at the final step, he turned around to face the small town, saying, "You need to be more tolerant in the future. Don't always be swayed by your personal feelings, so much so that you get into conflicts with people like Lu Xianying. In fact, you've even developed a killing intent toward him. Don't you find this beneath yourself?" Song Jisun sat down on the top step and looked toward the north with the man. He then asked a completely unrelated question, saying, "Is our Greatly Empire in the northernmost region of Eastern Treasured Bile Continent?" The man nodded and replied, "MHM, we've been regarded as northern barbarians for almost 1,000 years now. It's merely because we're powerful enough now that we've won a bit of respect." Song Jisun's head remained lowered. However, there was a fervent expression flickering in his eyes. Song Changjing continued in a calm voice, "When you return to the capital, you have to be wary of a person with the nickname Embroidered Tiger." Song Jisun was puzzled by this sudden warning. Song Changjing smiled and explained, "He's the imperial preceptor of the Greatly Empire, and he's more so the esteemed mentor of your brother. In the past 50 years, the Greatly Empire was able to expand from 70 counties and 800 cities to the current 140 counties and 1,500 cities. Our territory expanded immensely, and this person can take half the credit for that." Song Jisun vigorously looked up. The man smiled and asked, "Yes, you've guessed correctly." Sitting next to the young boy, the man placed his hands on his knees and gazed into the distance. The other person who had made a great contribution to the Greatly Empire and could take the remaining half of the credit was seemingly distant and profound, but he was, in fact, right beside him. Song Jisun's entire body was shaking at this moment, and even his mind felt completely numb. The two of them fell silent for a long time. At some point in time, Song Jisun suddenly said, "Uncle, even though I have killing intent toward Lu Xianying, and even though I considered making a deal with Old Dragon City's Fu Nanhua to have him kill Lu Xianying, I've never once viewed him as an equal to myself. This is the case even though he comes from a clan with an ancient and proud history. I only thought about killing him because doing so wouldn't cost me too much. That's all there is to it." Song Changjing became slightly interested. "In that case, the knot in your heart is because of something else?" The young boy remained silent as he rubbed his neck. In the silent depths of the night, there was surprisingly still someone walking along the alleys of the small town. Her figure was slender, and her clothes were thin. When she passed the Iron Lock Well in Apricot Blossom Alley, her jaws were clenched and her teeth were gritting. In fact, while passing the archway, she had viciously kicked one of the stone pillars. In the end, she arrived beneath the leafy old locust tree. According to the elderly residents, this tree had already lived for heaven knows how many years. Moreover, the old branches that fell down would never hit the people walking or standing beneath the tree. It was quite peculiar and incredible. The young girl strode up to the locust tree. She naturally didn't pay any heed to these nonsensical sayings. She then opened the ancient book that she had borrowed from her young master and started to reel off a series of names. She read the names one by one, and it was as if she were a general calling the names of her soldiers. When she became slightly parched, she finally stopped reading the names. She held the book that Song Jisun referred to as Beyond the Wall in one hand and pointed at the locust tree with the other, looking up and scolding, "I'm giving you face, but you're not going to accept my kind offer? Is that how it is?" The tree remained silent, not offering a response. The young girl immediately stomped her feet and cursed the 4 surnames and 10 clans. "I'll start with the 4 surnames first. Lu, Li, Zhao, and Song, I encourage your clans to understand the situation. Hurry up, I'll need at least 3 locust leaves from each clan. If you give me even one less, I, Wang Zhu, will never forgive you. When I leave this place, I'll deal with your clans one by one, and I won't show any mercy regardless of whether I come across young men, young women, the elderly, or children. You're all a bunch of ungrateful animals after all. You're not paying your debts of gratitude, yet you still think that you're in the right." The young girl huffed in anger. She placed a hand on her hip and continued to scold them, shouting, "Song clan. Who was it thanks to that the Greatly Empire followed your surname? Are you people not aware? Are you pretending to be stupid? Do you believe me if I say that I'll change the surname of the imperial family to Liu or Zhao when I get out? Anything apart from Song? The 10 clans. I'll need at least 2 locust leaves from each clan. As for the remaining clans, I need at least 1 locust leaf each. Of course, if anyone has the courage to up their bet, I'm also happy to take extras. In the future, I'll make sure that they end up with a fortune. Chao clan from the 10 clans. Yes, the Chao clan where that bastard Chaoshi came from. What disgusting thing didn't that brat do in the past? He was already filled with evil schemes when he was still a kid with open crotch pants. In addition to the 2 locust leaves, you need to give me 1 more locust leaf as compensation. Otherwise, I, Wang Ju, swear that I'll make it so that Chaoshi ends up with no descendants. He actually dared to piss into the well. How in the world did such an immoral bastard become a true lord? And the Xie clan. There's someone called Xiesher from your clan, correct? We've had some interactions before, and it was thanks to me that he wasn't washed away by the floods at that time. So, will it sit right with you if you don't give me 1 extra locust leaf? Qi Jingjun silently observed the sight from the distance, not speaking nor interfering. Like a strict father watching his daughter becoming more and more arrogant with age, he could only wear a slightly helpless and exasperated expression. However, Qi Jingjun also felt a sense of gratification as he watched the locust leaves flitter down and land between the pages of the book as the young girl continued to flip through it. There was a lot that he wanted to say, but in the end, Qi Jingjun simply murmured, "Make sure to take care of yourself after you leave home." As if sensing something, the young girl suddenly turned around. However, there was no one to be seen. The young girl felt a sense of despondence. However, she quickly shook her head and pushed these thoughts out of her mind. She then turned back around and continued to viciously scold the old locust tree. After returning onshore with the bamboo basket on his back, Qin Ping'an started to walk toward the Azure Cow Ridge. Perhaps it was a false impression, but the young boy felt like the water in the creek had lowered a little. When he arrived near the green stone cliff, he suddenly stopped in his tracks. This was because he could clearly see several people standing there, each of their appearances as clear as could be. This wasn't because they were being illuminated by the stars in the night sky. Instead, it was because a crystal-like white deer that was radiating with rays of white light was standing on the Azure Cow Ridge beside them. The rays of light wavered like the waterweeds in the creek. The white deer lowered its head, and a little girl wearing a bright red jacket did her best to get on her tippy toes and stroke its antler. Apart from her, there was also a young man and a young woman in Taoist robes. Perhaps it was because of the rays of white light coming from the white deer, but the skin of these 2 people appeared even whiter and more translucent than snow. If the residents of the small town were compared to clay figures made from mud, then these 2 Taoists from the outside world could be compared to the most exquisite pieces of art made from porcelain. The gulf between them was like the gulf between heaven and earth. The Taoist robes that the man and woman were wearing were slightly similar to the Taoist robes that Taoist Liu had worn. However, many of the details were different, and the Taoist hats that they wore were also extremely different. Taoist Liu had worn a lotus flower hat, while these 2 people were wearing a fishtail-shaped hat. The young boy in straw sandals looked at them in a daze. He felt like the man and woman standing beside the white deer were like immortals and deities that had walked out from a painting. It was as if they might fly away and ascend to the heavens at any moment, soaring so high that they could pluck the moon and stars. The other 2 people were standing slightly further away. Qin Ping'an recognized one of them, and she was none other than Master Ruan's daughter. The young girl in green didn't have a bag full of snacks this time, and she was instead only holding a small embroidered handkerchief with a few pieces of small and exquisite desserts. The young girl wore an extremely hesitant expression as she looked down, unsure of which dessert to eat first. The person standing beside her was around 30 years old, with a sword strapped to his back and a strange pendant hanging on his waist. When Qin Ping'an saw them, the group of people also noticed his sudden appearance. The young Taoist nun was slightly astonished, and she bent down to rub the head of the little girl in the bright red jacket. At the same time, she pointed at Chenpingen and said something to the little girl. The ears of the little girl immediately pricked up to listen to what this older sister was saying. She then opened her eyes as big as she could as she looked over, and it seemed like she was able to recognize Chenpingen's figure. She turned around and started to explain his background to the Taoist nun, who was most likely the owner of the white deer. At this moment, Chenpingen also recognized the little girl who was only 8 or 9 years old. The first time he had seen her was before he had gone to the Dragon Kills to work. While walking down Clayvase Alley, he had seen a little girl with twin pigtails running along at an incredible speed. She had been holding a paper bird kite, and her thin legs had been pumping as she shot down the alley like a gust of wind. This scene had stuck in Chenpingen's mind. Afterward, he had encountered her a few more times. One of these times, the little girl had been leaning over the edge of the iron lock well and secretly tossing stones inside. When Chenpingen had coincidentally come across her naughty behavior, she had been so frightened that she immediately turned around to run away. After running a dozen or so steps, however, she remembered that she had left her candied hawthorn stick on the well. She couldn't resist the temptation, so she had run back to the well to collect it. However, she had been too hurried, so with a smack, she had fallen to the ground. When she got up, she immediately grabbed the candied hawthorn stick and ran. After a few steps, she had suddenly stopped again, opening her mouth and using 2 fingers to pull out that wobbly tooth. She hadn't cried or shouted, and after putting the tooth in her pocket, she had turned around and started to run away again. That scene had caused cold sweat to form on Chenpingen's forehead. The last time he had seen her was in that area full of weeds and broken statues of gods. That was at dusk one day last autumn, and Chenpingen had been wandering around after returning to the small town from the Dragon Kill. As he strolled through the streets, he had seen the little girl rolling, jumping, and leaping around in the grass, completely focused on catching crickets. After seeing Chenpingen, it was clear that she recognized him, and she had immediately disappeared like a gust of wind again. Afterward, he had heard from Guken that even though this little girl was always covered in dirt and looked like a wild child who wasn't restrained by her guardians, she was, in fact, from Fortune's Streetsley clan. Moreover, she wasn't a servant or a maid. For some reason, however, she always liked to run around and play by herself, and her family didn't stop her either. In the end, Guken had been filled with pride and contempt as he talked about her. Even though she was quick, he said that she was actually very stupid. The two of them had coincidentally gone fishing at the creek at the same time once, and that stupid little girl had failed to catch a single rock slate fish after struggling for the entire afternoon. She had only managed to catch a single crab. Moreover, the only reason that she had been able to catch that crab was because that crab had viciously pinched her finger with its claw. When Guken had told Chenpingen about this, he had been laughing so hard that he couldn't help but clutch his stomach and kick his legs. He had said that she was truly stupid, and that she had even raised her hand and purposefully waved it around to show off to him. It was as if catching the crab had been a supremely impressive feat. Most importantly, it had been clear that she was already on the verge of tears due to the pain of being pinched by the crab. The handsome young man in Taoist robes glanced at the white deer and said to the young Taoist nun, "Senior sister I told you to be careful and not pamper it too much. We're only here for fewer than 10 days, and you only needed to use a simple camouflage technique. It wouldn't have inhibited its freedom at all. Yet, you refused to listen to me, and now we've been caught by a mere mortal. What are we going to do now?" The stunningly beautiful Taoist nun finished listening to the little girl's introduction of Chenpingen and said with a faint smile, "We'll let nature take its course." The young man frowned. He looked up and gazed over at the young boy again, and after observing him carefully for a short moment, he decided that he couldn't see anything special about this young boy in straw sandals and with a bamboo basket on his back. Even though their sect wasn't the best in the continent when it came to observing one's aura and determining one's aptitude, they were still indeed very skilled in these areas. Since this Taoist priest was capable enough to represent his sect to retrieve their treasure, and since he was responsible for guarding that treasure and bringing it back to the sect, it was abundantly clear that he was no ordinary person. Thus, since he saw nothing special about the young boy, he decided that there was no need to invite him to the sect. The young Taoist priest was extremely skilled in determining one's aptitude, so he didn't believe that he would make a mistake. The sect that he and the young Taoist nun belonged to was one of the 3 Taoist sects in Eastern Treasured Vile Continent. Moreover, their sect was the leader among the 3 Taoist sects, allowing them to enjoy an extremely revered status. As payment for completing this task for the sect, both he and his senior sister would obtain a valuable opportunity to recruit a true disciple to the sect. At the same time, they would be able to take this person as their own disciple as well. The young Taoist priest didn't want to waste this valuable opportunity, thus he needed to be extremely careful. Everyone in the sect knew that senior sister he viewed the cultivation of the mind with great importance. Thus, the simple remark of "let nature take its course" was a strong indication that she was having thoughts of taking someone as her disciple. He and his Xiaoyang were referred to as the Golden Boy and Jade Girl of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent. They were the paramount talents of the Taoist teaching in this continent. In fact, even the mortal rulers had to treat them with respect and reverence. Indeed, these rulers would have to treat them as if they were the true lords of a large empire. This was because they were cultivation prodigies who had the greatest chance of reaching the upper 5 tiers in this continent. When the young Taoist nun led the little girl down the Azure Cow Ridge, with the white deer following behind them, not only was her junior brother stunned, but even the man with a sword strapped to his back and a tiger talisman hanging by his waist was astonished. Qin Ping'an was slightly at a loss as he saw the Taoist nun slowly walking toward him. He truly didn't want to interact with these immortals from the outside world at this moment. This was because he knew that their eccentric emotions could easily decide his life or death. Moreover, Qin Ping'an knew that his luck had always been bad, so he was even more afraid of provoking them by accident. However, this didn't mean that Qin Ping'an would turn around and flee. Instead, he even took a few steps forward in a symbolic manner. That way, he would appear slightly more decent in the eyes of those on the Azure Cow Ridge. The white deer slightly quickened its pace, jogging over and circling around the young boy once. It then lowered its head and nudged the impoverished young boy. The white deer returned to its owner's side, and the young Taoist nun gently stroked its back. In the next instant, the white deer transformed into a horse. Pointing to a deer and calling it a horse, the young Taoist nun sighed softly as she looked at Qin Ping'an. She said something with a smile, and she then looked down at the little girl in red beside her. The little girl translated the Taoist nun's words into the dialect of the small town, saying in a timid voice, "Sister, he said that you're a person who cherishes their fortunes. However, the fate between you is shallow, so the 2 of you can't become fellow Taoists." Qin Ping'an was rendered speechless. This was because he didn't know what to say to not appear disrespectful. A bamboo basket on his back, straw sandals on his feet, his pant legs rolled up. The young boy's appearance was extremely peculiar and comical. The Taoist nun smiled and asked, "Do you also know about the secret uses of these pebbles?" "Don't worry, Qin Ping'an. This is only a casual question." The little girl translated this for Qin Ping'an, her words quick and her voice crisp. Qin Ping'an hesitated for a moment before nodding and replying, "A Taoist priest gave me a clue before. He said that I could frequently come here to collect pebbles and fish." Even though Qin Ping'an had a good impression of this young Taoist nun, he still spoke extremely carefully and didn't reveal Taoist Lu's surname. Moreover, the person who had actually told him about the value of the snake gall pebbles was Ning Yao and not Taoist Lu. The Taoist nun smiled and asked, "You're also familiar with our junior Uncle Lu?" Qin Ping'an faltered upon hearing this. The Taoist nun smiled and explained briefly, "Strictly speaking, Junior Uncle Lu isn't from the same sect as us. However, when he visited our sect a long time ago, he conversed with one of our senior uncles as an equal. He stayed at our sect for many years, so we juniors also became familiar with him. As time went on, we naturally became used to referring to him as Junior Uncle." Qin Ping'an cracked a grin. He finally felt at ease at this moment. He was extremely grateful to Taoist Lu, and this was a sense of gratitude that he wouldn't forget for his entire life. Qin Pinyin remembered something at this moment, and he squatted down to place the bamboo basket on the ground. He then retrieved a pebble that he had taken a liking to at first sight. It was as large as an egg and a glossy green, making the pebble appear as clear and glistening as water. This was unlike the other snake gall pebbles. He offered it to the young Taoist nun and said, "If you see Taoist Lu in the future, could you please give this pebble to him for me?" After hearing the little girl's translation, the young Taoist nun thought about it for a brief moment before accepting the pebble and saying, "Before arriving here, I coincidentally came across Junior Uncle Lu just as he was leaving. He was heading to the Southern Stream Nation to attend an important ceremony of a Taoist sect. In terms of when we'll meet again, that's truly hard to say. However, I'll definitely give this to Junior Uncle Lu for you when I see him again." A beaming smile spread across Qin Pinyin's face as he heard the little girl's translation. He bowed in gratitude to the young Taoist nun who he had an extremely good impression of. When it came to the goodness or wickedness of a stranger, Qin Pinyin always believed in his instincts. This was just like how he had quickly judged the characters of Fu Nanhua and Kai Jinjian, and just like how he had quickly judged the characters of Taoist Lu and Ning Yao. Qin Pinyin retrieved another snake gall pebble and offered it to her. The Taoist nun, who enjoyed the title of #1 for fated opportunities among the younger generation in Eastern Treasured Vile Continent, didn't refuse Qin Pinyin's offer. She accepted it with a smile, not forgetting to thank him in the process. The little girl in the bright red jacket tugged at the corners of her clothes and mumbled in a quiet voice, "I also want one." Qin Pinyin smiled before turning around to pick a pebble for the little girl. The little girl ran to his side and said in a careful voice, "I want a bigger one. Is that okay?" Qin Pinyin smiled and replied, "As long as you're able to carry it, I can even give you the biggest one. However, this place is quite far away from the small town and your home. Moreover, I feel like the bigger pebbles in the basket aren't actually as good as the smaller ones." The little girl thought about this for a moment before leaning over the side of the basket and saying, "All right, then I'll pick a smaller one. However, it needs to look good." After hearing this, Qin Pinyin picked a small pebble that was lotus pink in color. It was smooth and adorable, and the little girl was extremely satisfied as she held it in her hands. She suddenly cocked her head and opened her mouth, pointing to her small teeth. She then giggled at Qin Pinyin, an expression of pride on her face. She was most likely showing off the fact that her tooth had regrown again. "We'll go and catch crickets together next time," Qin Pinyin said with a happy smile. The little girl's eyes immediately lit up upon hearing this. However, they quickly dimmed again, and she forced herself to smile and nod. Qin Pinyin slung the bamboo basket over his shoulders and bade farewell to the young Taoist nun. He didn't forget to also wave goodbye to the little girl as he ran back to the small town by himself. They were both celestial maidens, yet the might and influence of this young Taoist nun was something that Kai Jinjian from Dawn Cloud Mountain could never have hoped to achieve. The gulf between them was like the gulf between immortal gold essence and ordinary mortal gold. The young Taoist nun led the little girl and the white deer back to Azure Cow Ridge. The young Taoist priest retracted his gaze from the young boy in straw sandals, and he concluded, "A fate shallow leading to a fortune thin, it's only natural that he won't reach great heights." There were countless Taoist sects in Eastern Treasured Vile Continent, and every 30 years, a new pair of Golden Boy and Jade Girl would be chosen. This time, he and senior sister He Xiaoyang had been chosen, and they were more so a match made in heaven. However, something had astonished everyone. While the Golden Boy was no less talented than the previous Golden Boys, the fortune and luck of the Jade Girl was so incredible that everyone was rendered absolutely speechless with shock. When she was born, a white deer that symbolized auspiciousness had walked out from the mountains and taken her as its master. Afterward, it was as if she faced no challenge or obstruction in cultivation as she smoothly ascended again and again. In fact, some people even said that she would only face her first obstacle when she ascended to the upper 5 tiers. She didn't comment on her junior brother's dismissive and belittling attitude toward the young boy in straw sandals. She simply brushed over it with a smile. At this moment, a short young boy walked from somewhere near the deep pool under the covered bridge to the water pit under the Azure Cow Ridge. There was a single snake gall pebble in his hands, and like the white deer from before, it was surprisingly glowing with a brilliant radiance. Holding the pebble in his hand, the expressionless young boy stood on a rock that was exposed above the water's surface. At this moment, he looked like a mighty immortal who was holding a full moon in his hand. The large green fish and the large red fish raised by the young Taoist priest didn't enter the water. Instead, they slowly swam above the gently flowing creek. If Chenpingen saw this young boy, he would immediately recognize him as Granny Ma's grandson. The young boy had been retarded ever since a young age, and because of this, he had also been disliked and abandoned by his parents from very early on. Thus, it was left to Granny Ma to raise this grandson by herself. The young boy was a big misfit, and he would often climb to the rooftops to gaze at the clouds by himself. This young boy, who had taken the same surname as Granny Ma, had also been bullied so much that the other children eventually felt like it would soil their shoes to even step on him. In fact, this pitiful young boy had seemingly only ever smiled at the maidservant Ji Gui before. It was also because of this that Granny Ma detested that maidservant so much. She felt like that young girl was a shameless seductress, and she was certain that this lowly maidservant had purposefully tried to seduce her treasured grandson. The young Taoist nun walked up to the man with the sword strapped to his back and asked, regarding Ma Kuxuan, "Is there really no wiggle room at all? If your junior uncle really wanted to take this child as his opening disciple, why didn't he come here himself? So what if he's famous? We've never fought before, so why do I have to take a step back? If he can't accept this, then tell him to go to True Marshall Mountain to look for me. If he wins, then I'll allow him to take this child away." The young Taoist priest smiled and said, "That's merely delaying the inevitable. Why bother?" There were needles hidden in his words. "Oh!" The man with the sword strapped to his back squinted. Meanwhile, the young Taoist nun was slightly annoyed as she listened to their conversation. She shot a glance at her junior brother, who laughed and stopped targeting the man with the sword. He looked up and remarked to himself, "The moon is so beautiful tonight." The young Taoist nun felt slightly exasperated. When it came to that junior uncle, to say nothing of her and her junior brother, perhaps all of the young Taoist priests in the continent would feel a sense of shared pride. Before the steps leading onto the covered bridge, there stood a barefoot monk with a square face and an iron-willed expression. This ascetic monk didn't look up at the plaque with golden words, and he instead looked at the ground where Song Jisun had placed the incense sticks before. He lowered his head and recited in a compassionate voice, Amitabha. The short young boy climbed on shore and walked up the Azure Cow Ridge. He glanced at the two ethereal Taoists, and he glanced at the dignified man with the sword strapped to his back. In the end, he stared intently at the latter and said through gritted teeth, "I don't want to learn how to cultivate and become immortal or whatnot. Can you just teach me how to kill someone?" The man smiled proudly and replied, "Ever since ancient times, we swordsmen have always possessed the most ferocious ability to kill." The young Taoist priest smiled and mused, "Oh." However, the young Taoist nun shook her head, knowing that everything had already been settled. She had failed to honor her junior uncle's request, so she couldn't help but feel a sense of guilt. The atmosphere on the Azure Cow Ridge suddenly became tense. It was as if a fight might break out at any moment. The little girl from the Li clan hurriedly hid behind her Taoist sister. The young girl in green finished her last piece of dessert at this moment, leaving her in an extremely terrible mood. "If you two are so capable, why don't you go and challenge my father?" she snapped. The man, who was well acquainted with the young girl and her father, finally relaxed his stern expression, smiling and saying, "How should we carry out the fight?" The young Taoist priest added, "Ruan Xiao, that's picking on us. Your father is going to replace Mr. Qi and become the next sage, so he'll essentially become the owner of this small world." The young girl in green pursed her lips and remained silent. The monk slowly walked over and climbed up the Azure Cow Ridge. The thundering pagoda of the Buddhist sect, the heavenly master seal of the Taoist sect, and the small sword resting ground of the martial sect. Of course, There's also the mountain range jade plate of the Confucian sect. These are the 4 subjugation treasures left by the 4 earliest sages. Let's not talk about the internal conflict of the Confucian sect, and let's just focus on the 3 forces that we represent. Even though it's perfectly reasonable for us to retrieve our subjugation treasures, might it be inappropriate for us to do so without informing Mr. Qi first? The young Taoist nun said. The monk remained silent. Meanwhile, the young Taoist priest wore a concerned expression as he said, "It will indeed be a little rude. However, it's difficult for us to go against the orders from above, so I'm of the opinion that you shouldn't make things even more complicated, senior sister." The man with the sword strapped to his back sneered and said, "I'm not here to cotton up with anyone." When Chen Ping'an arrived at the alley where Lu Xianyang's house was located, what he saw was Mr. Qi standing in front of the door. The young boy quickly walked over, and before he could even say anything, Qi Jingjun had already handed 2 seals to him, saying with a smile, "Chen Ping'an, I'm not giving these to you for nothing. I have something to ask of you. If Mountain Cliff Academy faces any danger in the future, I hope that you can help them to the best of your ability. Of course, there's no need for you to deliberately keep an eye on Mountain Cliff Academy all the time." The young boy replied with a single word, "Sure." Qi Jingjun nodded and said in a meaningful manner, "You must always remember what I said to you before. A noble person won't pointlessly risk their life to save someone. This statement comes from my heart, and it's not merely an attempt to test you." The young boy cracked a grin and said, "Mr. Qi, I can't make any promises." Qi Jingjun wanted to say something, yet he ultimately decided against it. He was just about to leave. He had initially wanted to say, "Even if Mountain Cliff Academy faces a great danger in the future, and you feel a sense of regret, there's still no need for you to feel any guilt or remorse. Just pretend that you didn't see or hear anything. You don't need to force yourself to do anything." For some reason, however, Qi Jingjun felt a lingering sense of hope deep down. Even he was perplexed by why this was. Mulling over this, the master of Mountain Cliff Academy could only reach a single answer. Everything was because of the young boy before him. It was because this young boy was called Chen Ping'an. It was as if he were different from everyone else. If you gave this young boy a task, no matter how difficult it was, there was still one thing that you could guarantee with absolute confidence, even if you knew that he would ultimately fail regardless of how hard he tried. That was, if he agreed to do something, he would definitely go and do it. If he couldn't succeed with 100% effort, then he would be willing to grit his teeth and put in 120% effort. This was a thought that would put one's mind at ease. This was something that Qi Jingjun had searched for but failed to find for countless years. This scholar, who had actively asked to be banished to this place, had initially thought that everywhere in the world was a foreign land. When Qi Jingjun was about to turn around and leave, the young boy who was still carrying the bamboo basket hurriedly bowed and paid his respects in a strenuous manner. In the alley, the Confucian sage's movements were extremely proper as he returned the respects.